That's our friend Rooks G out there with some jungle drum and bass while we give it another minute. We're about to start. Let's go. That's our friend Rooks G. Let's go. All right, so let's get after it. What's up? What's up, y'all? Let's go. So this weekend, what day is it? Weekends? This weekend we're covering Bob Dylan, and this is a sponsor stream. Thanks to our friend Adam out there who dropped a fat chat for this to cover Bob Dylan and the lyrics of Bob Dylan. So I thought we would get after this. All right. So I've got Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize for Literature speech here, his lecture. I've got a bunch of lyrics, selected lyrics from songs that I think best exemplify Bob Dylan as a songwriter. And I've also got a whole stack of other books to talk about here as far as analyzing the lyrics of Bob Dylan go. I've also got, I don't know if I'll have time to throw this in, but I've also got David Bowie. David Bowie. We've got David Bowie here. And that really it doesn't relate to Bob Dylan, but since we're doing songwriting lyrics, I might get to that. But I've also got Beat Generation, Allen Ginsberg. I watched the Rolling Thunder Revue by Martin Scorsese this afternoon. I might talk about D.A. Pennebaker's um, Don't Look Back. I did not rewatch the film that came out in 2007 that had Christian Bale and all those people in it because I tried to watch it back in the day. I couldn't really get into it, but I don't think that that's important. So so let's talk about Bob Dylan. This is I said a Gen X millennial. This is a Gen X millennial take on Bob Dylan. And what does that mean? Well, I'm not taking on. It's not a verb. It's a noun. I'm giving my take on Dylan and why Gen X millennial because I'm 1980, so I'm a geriatric millennial, sort of on the cusp, I suppose. Which is weird. I've talked about this before, but it's weird that you go through this thing, especially in the 90s. If you grew up if you were a teenager in the 90s, I always thought that I was a Generation X because all of the music that I listened to and all of the culture and everything that I read was about Generation X as opposed to the baby boomer generation. But it actually, in all actuality, that's not really that accurate. Not that it matters, but whatever. I mean, that's probably let's say, who did the generations? What is that? Rand Corporation or something? I mean, that's there are certainly differences in generations, yes, and they're always, but in terms of artistic eras and the reaction to them going generationally, I think that applies to this. So I suppose I'm probably as much a millennial as a Gen X in terms of things that I appreciate and like. But what we're going to talk about here is the fact that there are many different takes on Bob Dylan and his lyrics, and I think it's important to keep in mind that when appreciate especially when appreciating it's not a lesson or whatever. Everybody can have whatever their own opinion is, but when you discuss literature or rather music, when you discuss music, I think that I like to appreciate music without exclusivity. So that means that just because I might like or dislike a Bob Dylan song or anybody else, it doesn't mean that it's at the expense of anything else. So let me give you an example. So I watched the Martin Scorsese Rolling Thunder review today, and I thought one of the things that popped into my mind was that Rolling Thunder review was this cultural movement, medicine show in the mid 70s, around 1975, like sort of Bob Dylan Desire era. And it has a cultural impact. But when I watched that, one of the things that I took away was, okay, that was big for the 70s and it has echoes into the later decades. But when I see that, I think this is and this is a weird connection, but this is kind of what I see when I watch MDE. Now, I'm not comparing MDE to Bob Dylan, but what I'm saying is that when I watch Sam Hyde do what he does with MDE, I think I watch it and I go, "This is important," and it's something for the future. It's like Ezra Pound said, "Make it new." So it's something for the future, and obviously, an older generation does not they might appreciate it, they might not, but they certainly don't really get it. And I think that's probably the same with what Dylan was doing in the '70s. I mean, you could see it in the film that, like, the older people and obviously the boomer reaction, the boomers as a reaction to the sort of '50s, post World War II generation, Um, it's it's the same sort of reaction in the sense that they don't get it, and there's a conflict amongst the 2, but that's art is created out of that. So I think that I think that, like, MDE is just as important in a way, right? But that doesn't mean that the 2 are exclusive of each other. Like, you can recognize and you can look at art that is completely disparate from other art, and it all falls into basically, it all falls into the category of what Robert Pinsky, the former poet laureate, said, "Is it good or not?" Right? Is it important? Is it good? Or is it bad? Right? And, those are really the 2 big circles. So so let's talk about Bob Dylan, and first of all, I'm gonna start by talking about his Nobel Prize speech in, in 2016. I think he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now Dylan had been nominated a few times for the Nobel Prize for Literature, and what's interesting is that even when he won the award, there were stories about how the, Swedish committee were trying to call him and get in touch with him to let him know that he won, and he wouldn't take the calls, and I think that's funny. I gotta say, I I like Dylan, especially certain eras and songs. I do not like '60s Dylan, but I do appreciate what he's doing, in terms of I can recognize the impact in an objective, dispassionate way. But I think that '70s Dylan is really, especially mid to late '70s Dylan is pretty cool to me in the sense that one thing I got from Rolling Thunder Review was that whenever people try to pin him down on his, like, for instance, his political opinions, he kind of has this, air of, like, just really don't give a shit, you know? And I think that's kinda cool. But that's not to say that he's not political, and especially the the art that he creates is highly political in terms of its, like, what it creates in society and the way people latch onto it. And I'm not even talking about culture creation as an entity, in this instance. I'm just saying that I thought it was interesting that at the very beginning of the film, um, the filmmaker asks him, what do you think of," because this is, like, a few decades on, they ask him, "What do you think about Rolling Thunder Revue?" And his response is, "Rolling Thunder Revue? I don't know, man. It was shit. It was just some bullshit that we did. I don't even remember it. I don't remember it. I wasn't even born yet, man." And that's interesting actually that he says he wasn't born yet because, um, he obviously means that as a kind of metaphorical hyperbole, if I can use that as a term that I just made up. But, uh, remember it was after this that Dylan went through his born again Christian phase. Now, I don't really honestly, I don't know what to make of that because I know that that's not the case anymore. Um, so I think that my gut reaction tells me that there's a there's a scene in it where Dylan goes to Clinton Correctional Facility, and you remember that Tupac song? So Reuben Carter was in the same facility, not at the time, but he was in the same facility as Tupac and Reuben Carter, the Hurricane. Dylan goes to speak to Reuben Carter, and they said, "Do you know anything about the hurricane and, like, his case?" And Dylan was like, I don't know who that is, man. I don't know anything about that." So so he goes and he meets with Reuben Carter, and, like, the discussion that ensues is pretty interesting because they said that Reuben Carter said that when Dylan came to visit him, he had different, questions and different attitude than all the other, you know, let's say, guilty certain type of people, the do-gooders who came to help him. And basically, he didn't ask him anything about that. He basically they talked about life and, like, what are you searching for? So here's what I'm getting at with the Reuben Carter thing and the born again Christian thing. I think that Dylan's thing as an artist is obviously searching. He's searching for meaning, and you wonder why somebody didn't just come up to him and be like, "Man, you need to go to church." Well, I guess at one point they did, and he found meaning. But of course, I don't know what he did with that. I assume it was some sort of um, rural, like, Pentecostal movement that he was involved in. I really don't know, but he found meaning in that, and I guess that. so whatever, and that moved on. That which is kind of a shame, but um, but I guess that's what it is. It's more of like an artistic searching for meaning, and I guess that is probably a reaction to that may be a reaction to. I might be reaching here, but it might be a reaction to what he said in that interview about who he owed his debt to, right? Which was he said the commander in chief of the world. Now I got an article here from let's see, Far Out magazine, and it's titled "The Ridiculous Sea Theory That Claims Dylan Sold His Soul to the Devil." Now it's obviously not ridiculous because what he says in the interview is he says they asked him about why he continues to tour so much. And I mentioned this on Maddie's, I think on Maddie's stream the other night, Digital Minefield, our homeboy. It says he was then promptly asked who he made a deal with, to which Dylan gave a wry smile, laughed, and said, "With the commander in chief of this earth and the world we can't see." Instead of taking Dylan's comments as a bit of fun or following the inference that he made a deal with God, because why would he put it in that way? Deal? Like a transaction? You don't make a deal like that with God. Many on the internet believe that God gives you love freely. Many on the internet believe that Dylan actually made a deal with the devil in order to become famous. These people claim that God um, nor Jesus make bargains. Well, why is that a ridiculous claim, right? Therefore, the only culprit has to be the devil because that's the phraseology, right? Given that rock has long had a loose association with the devil and the fact that religion still permeates many parts of the world, there can be no surprise that a relationship between Dylan and the devil has been conjured up in the wake of his rather bizarre comments. Come on. It's almost certain that Dylan didn't make a deal with anyone apart from the record companies. Huh, okay. Well, that's also isn't that that's an extension in many ways. I mean, so many artists say that. You remember a few years ago the thing about Mariah Carey and her sister that came out, and everybody said, "Ah, she's mentally ill, and she's just, she's schizoidal and all this stuff." Well, maybe so. Who knows? But that certainly seems to be a manifestation of the kind of demonic entities that she mentions in the interview, and the fact that these people have to sell their integrity and everything they own and the right to their life and the way that they appear and their appearances and everything to this record company. It if at the very least it seems like not a stretch. It's not just a metaphor. This particular theory has existed for years and shows no signs of abating. We wonder which modern artist will be the next to be placed in the center of this web. Well, I mean, come on. He says it in the interview, right? And also there is a sort of an art, there's an obvious artistic connection between Robert Johnson and Bob Dylan in terms of the kind of troubadour figure that they became. So, I guess maybe if I was to have a take on it, it would be that that phase of Dylan's life when he found Christ would be as a form of trying to squash and eradicate and obliterate this deal that he'd made. Who knows? Okay. Shouts out to Nate. Shouts out to our homeboy Nate out there since 9.99 super chat. He says, "Thanks for the awesome content, BLA. Glad to finally catch you live. What's your top two favorite Dylan albums and why? What is your favorite Dylan line?" Well, my favorite Dylan my favorite Dylan albums are Blood on the Tracks and Desire. Definitely, just no question. Definitely, I think those are the two best albums. That's what I was talking about when I was talking about, sort of mid 70s era when he got into this kind of troubadour medicine show thing, and then when he played with the Last Waltz with the band. And my favorite, I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite Dylan line, but I'd say one is the one that I put in the video description here, which is uh she gave me a book of poems from an Italian poet from the 13th century, and every one of them poems rang true like it was written in burning coal. And what does he say? They came off every page like it was written in my soul from me to you. I think that's amazing because that's visceral to me and it speaks to me and is a poetic connection between, you know, he says Italian poets, so we obviously think Dante, and we think the Inferno. Go back to my Inferno analysis that we did. But also, Dylan took a lot from the kind of troubadour, gypsy, traveling, commedia dell'arte, medieval, this dramatic and musical work of the 11th to the 15th century. He also takes a lot from Rimbaud and post-Enlightenment and symbolist era France. But what I got to say about Bob Dylan, I mean, my take on Bob Dylan, if anything, is that his music is wholly American in a way that we haven't gotten with many other artists. Now, yes, obviously Elvis is the like most American of the art of the 20th century musical artists in many ways. But Elvis didn't write his own songs and it never like acted like he did. So Bob Dylan is the sort of seminal singer-songwriter of the 20th century. And of course, I don't know what McGowan says about Bob Dylan. I don't know about other people writing his songs, but I haven't seen anything that would tell me that his songs were written by committee like they do with many artists, right? And pass them off as their own. Um, but I think that or that he had ghostwriters. I think Bob Dylan probably wrote his own songs. Now he takes a lot and he steals a great artist steal, bad artists follow, bad artists borrow. But I think that he steals a lot from people like Woody Guthrie and Robert Johnson and Muddy Waters, obviously. I mean, like a Rolling is let's see, like a Rolling Stone, is that Muddy Waters? I think that's a Muddy Waters line. And for a second, I was thinking, I used to think about did the Rolling Stones themselves get the name of the band from Bob Dylan? And obviously, Rolling Stone magazine took its cue from Dylan and the Rolling Stones, and then originating in Muddy Waters. I think it was Muddy Waters. Somebody correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. But but remember, it was John Lennon who was on the cover of the first Rolling Stone. And actually, in my Kubrick group, we've been doing some analysis of like why um what's his name? What's the guy's name in Full Metal Jacket with the glasses? It's not Joker. The other guy, the guy with the glasses who gets shot. Why that guy looks he has the same sort of appearance. I mean, Matthew Modine in a way. Actually, it's Matthew Modine probably. Matthew Modine as Joker in Full Metal Jacket has a weird sort of intellectual but rock and roll appearance and attitude similar to John Lennon in on the cover because John Lennon was in that movie. He was in a movie where he played a Tommy from World War One, and that's where the cover of Rolling Stone one, the first edition comes from. So I don't know, but anyway, so yeah, I think that certainly watching Rolling Thunder Review, you get a you get this sort of feeling that it's not wholly healthy or spiritually healthy, the way that the characters are on this train, right? They're on this later, he writes the album Slow Train, song Slow Train Coming, right? Is that the album title? But one thing that one of the filmmakers, the guy who actually filmed it when it was going on, um, said was that he recognized the importance of Rolling Thunder Review because if anything, it gathered a bunch of artists who were good and passionate about their music and their art, gathered them in one place and put them all on this train, not a literal train, metaphorical train, on this Rolling Thunder tour, and let them be the most extreme versions of themselves. And there's something to be said for that in terms of artistic integrity, but the way that it kind of comes off is not wholly healthy. I don't know. It's not. I mean, I know it's rock and roll, but it's also there's something weird about it. And I think part of that is the mask aspect. Now, one thing they did during that tour was they wore masks. And part of it is that they're obviously mimicking a commedia dell'arte piece. Like they are traveling troubadours and they're playing smaller venues and they're going across America. And it is political by nature because they're trying to comment on the post 60s chaos in the 70s. Even naming it Rolling Thunder Review is interesting because they asked Dylan how he came up with the name of it. And he said, well, I was trying to, he's got a cool way of talking. He's like, Well, I was trying to think of a name, and I was outside, and I looked up at the sky, and I thought, what am I going to call this? And then I heard thunder, and then the thunder. Then I heard thunder again, and that was rolling thunder. And then later I asked somebody, what's rolling thunder for the Indians, and they told me, well, rolling thunder means you speak truth. And then, of course, they go and they play at a Indian reservation for Chief Rolling Thunder, and they dedicate the whole thing to him. But then somebody somebody came up to him and was like, it's just come to light that the secret bombing campaign in Vietnam, where they are bombing Cambodia, is called Operation Rolling Thunder, and it's it's based in Guam. The Air Force takes off from Guam, and our opening act is a band called Guam. And he was like, "Wow, man, that's pretty interesting." Also, it was cool. Somebody said something about Sam Shepard, and it was cool to see Sam Shepard in there. Because Sam Shepard, they asked him, to take part in this and to sort of document it. And Sam Shepard's response, again, you see this more and more. If you sort of look at it, uh, you gain insight into the way that artists act. It's kind of like when on the album Ready to Die, right? They ask Biggie, who influenced you? And he says, nobody really influenced me. You know what I'm saying? And you get that from artists. Now, obviously, all artists take a cue from artists that they are trying to imitate. They You start off by imitation, and then you gain your own voice. So Bob Dylan obviously takes his inspiration from people like Woody Guthrie. I mean, he spent all that time in the hospital room with Woody Guthrie, and from the early 20th century American sort of troubadour blues musicians and blues, hill country blues, Delta blues, all these people. But then what he does is he makes it his own, and he gets his own voice to it, and he puts it into rock and roll in a way that others hadn't. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so Sam Shepard is talking about it, and he's like, "Well, I don't really know anything about any of this. I don't really give a shit." But Bob Dylan says we needed Sam Shepard because he had insights into the underworld that other people didn't. And that's interesting because that kind of takes us to the song Joey. And Joey's an interesting song because it's kind of the twin of the hurricane. It's like a shadow twin or a twin shadow. You remember I was thinking of that yesterday. You remember that guy Twin Shadow? You might not have heard of him. He put out some pretty good music in the around 2010. He had a good album. But anyway, so you've got the song Hurricane, which is a an SJW song about Reuben Carter, which which also has a weird mafia ties in the actual story because it takes place in 70s in the heat, in Heat, New Jersey summer, where the location of the event that happened took place. But then the song Joey is also a kind of a New York, New Jersey song, and it's about like memorializing Joey Gallo, right? The mobster Joey Gallo, who is the one in remember in The Irishman. Joey Gallo was assassinated, right, by Robert De Niro's character in The Irishman in that diner. And one person who was not happy with this was the writer Lester Bangs, the rock musician, rock journalist, sorry, Lester Bangs, who talks about how this was total bullshit. It was, why are you creating this aura of like Robin Hoodism around Joey Gallo? So he did not like that, and that part's also interesting uh, because Lester Bangs is one of Lester Bangs' favorite bands was the MC5 with Wayne Kramer. Was it Patti Smith married to Wayne Kramer? She might have been. Um, I don't know if I'm accurate with that. But Patti Smith was part of Rolling Thunder. And I actually have a weird connection to Patti Smith. Actually, let me get this real quick. I'll show it to you. It's not really that interesting. It's not really that interesting, but I thought I would show it to you. So I've got this, which is um that's to me, and it's I know it's mirrored, but that's Patti Smith. And it's from an art show that she did. I guess this was in yeah, this is 2007. And I got that because I knew her sister. And I didn't know that when I met her. We were just talking and stuff. Just to as she was a friend. And we were talking, we talked for a long time one day, and, then she mentioned that she had to go to New York because she had to go to this art show for her sister, and I was like, "Who's your sister? She an artist?" And she said, "My sister is Patti Smith." I said, "What the fuck? What are you talking about? Patti Smith is your sister?" She said, "Yeah, I'll get you an autograph for her." I said, "Okay." So that was wild. Her sister was living in Virginia, but yeah, so Kristen says, "I've never liked any entertainers being discussed, but I'm still listening." Thank you, Slow Boy Whiteboard, appreciate you. So, yeah, I think it's important, even if, people do have a strong reaction to some of these to especially to musicians. Um, yes, Fred Sonic Smith, thank you, guys. So people have a strong reaction to musicians, and especially to certain artistic eras of music. And I think that music does this weird thing with especially generationally, which is like it music I guess it's because music is so personal to people, because of how it speaks to your soul in a way that, people can be very, offensive or defensive about music, and I think that's kind of natural. That's one of the powers of it. So Dylan is a kind of divisive figure in the sense that, um honestly, I didn't like Bob Dylan when I was younger, and I didn't get him, and part of that is like, your parents if you're my age, your parents probably love Dylan, and that's cool, and that's natural, that they would, and, that's it's understandable why, and then later on, you get into this place. I mean, I remember when I was about probably 16 hanging with my friends, and one of my friends, put on, The Hurricane, and, like, it was just cool. It's just it was a it was a good song to drive around to, which is all we had to do back then, and then I started, listening to the lyrics, and so I especially really appreciate those 2 albums, and then as time goes on, like, somebody brought up in the chat earlier, one of Dylan's songs on Slow Train Coming that's pretty based, and that was in his Christian phase, and it's amazing actually to listen to the lyrics of that song, which I'll try to go over later, but it is pretty based. And then also, what's that song? Um, oh, When You Gonna Wake Up? Yeah, so he says, you want me to read the lyrics to When You Gonna Wake Up? He says, "God don't make no promises that he don't keep. You got some big dreams, baby, but in order to dream, you gotta be asleep. When you gonna wake up? When you gonna wake up? When you gonna wake up and strengthen the things that remain? Counterfeit philosophies have polluted all your thoughts. Karl Marx has got you by the throat. Henry Kissinger's got you tied up in knots. When you gonna wake up?" It's good so far, right? You got innocent men in jail. Insane asylums are filled. Well, uh, we can now say that that's probably looking back on the other side of this. That's one of the mistakes that Reagan made, right? We got all the people that were locked up in nut houses seem to go, come on out for a weekend. We'll give you a hammer and some meth, and you can run riot in the streets of name the city, right? So I don't know about that. You got men who can't hold their peace, women who can't control their tongues. The rich seduce the poor, and the old are seduced by the young. Adulterers in churches and pornography in the schools. You got gangsters in power and lawbreakers making rules. Well, damn if that ain't the case. Bubba Based, spiritual advisors and gurus to guide your every move. Instant inner peace and every step you take has got to be approved. So he's talking about cults here. You think he's just an errand boy to satisfy your wandering desire. Do you ever wonder just what God requires? You can't take it with you and you know it's too worthless to be sold. They tell you time is money as if your life was worth its weight in gold. There's a man on a cross and he been crucified for you. Believe in his power. That's about all you got to do. Okay. All right. So, we're getting towards some good material here. I mean, and can you believe Bob Dylan wrote that song? I think probably people have forgotten that he wrote that. What's the other song, Jethro? What's the other song that that AJ plays all the time that Dylan was on Slow Train Coming? Gotta serve somebody. That's it. Oh, I got the lyrics to that here. So, what should I do now? Should I take you through Dylan's Nobel lecture? Because this is what this really is about, this stream. So, Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature in, I think 2016. Now, what's interesting is, I mean, he also won the Pulitzer Prize, nameless, unnumbered Grammys. He won an Oscar. Um, he won an Oscar for a song in 2001 for that movie Wonder Boys, which is actually kind of interesting because that was, if you haven't seen that movie, it was filmed at it was filmed part of it was filmed at the 92nd Street Y in New York, which is where I saw Audrey and Rich read her poems, and I sat next to Harold Bloom. And then, but I think it takes place at Yale, and Michael Douglas is a college professor. It's also got Robert Downey Jr. in his post-90s speedball era, pre-Iron Man era. But that was also the Oscars where, I think that was the Oscars where Elliott Smith performed, and that's an interesting crossover because yeah, Elliott Smith died in 2003, so I think that was 2001 Oscars. So Elliott Smith was in there for Between the Bars? Was that it? Between the Bars, from Good Will Hunting. No, that must have been in the late '90s when he did that. But anyway, it is an interesting crossover because Elliott Smith is a kind of a Bob Dylan. Not like sort of in terms of an archetype, right? He's a singular singer-songwriter playing on an acoustic guitar. And they both have a what you would read into it would be like a highly emotional and sentimentalist aptitude for human emotions. That's just my take. I mean, I love Elliott Smith, and in fact, I can't really. Elliott Smith is a good example of what I was talking about earlier. That like his music is very personal to me, and so I just think it's interesting that we have this sort of crossover troubadour thing going on. So that must have been in '98 or '99 when Elliott Smith was there. Nevertheless, this is like pre and just post Big Nine era. So, um, so here's the Nobel lecture by Bob Dylan. So he says, and he actually ended up going to the thing and giving his Nobel lecture, which is common for the laureate to do. And he says, yeah, when I say highly emotional, I don't mean Bob Dylan himself is highly emotional. He's not. But I mean that the way that his lyrics appeal to people, or that they take his lyrics and the kind of aura of his songs on. I mean, look at A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, The Times They Are Changing, Mr. Tambourine Man. We can't say that that's not emotional because of what people did with it. They became emotional protest songs. I'm not saying that he wrote that in the spirit of that or that his songs are, but it's something that becomes very personalized to people. Um, and yeah, and Gwen says Elliott Smith and Dylan aren't very alike, really. Well, they are in the ways that I just explained. When I first received this Nobel Prize for Literature, I got to wondering exactly how my songs related to literature. I wanted to reflect on it and see where the connection was. I'm going to try to articulate that. And most likely it will go in a roundabout way, but I hope what I say will be worthwhile and purposeful. Okay. If I was to go back to the dawning of it all, I guess I'd have to start with Buddy Holly. This is a weird paragraph. Buddy died when I was about 18 and he was 22. From the moment I first heard him, I felt akin. I felt related, like he was an older brother. I even thought I resembled him. That is what I was just talking about, right? Especially in terms of imitation of art and feeling like music speaks to you personally. Buddy played the music that I love, the music that I grew up on: country, western, rock and roll, and rhythm and blues. Three separate strands of music that intertwined and infused into one genre, one brand. My buddy wrote songs that had beautiful melodies and imaginative verses, and he sang great, sang in more than a few voices. He was the archetype, everything I wasn't and I wanted to be. I saw him only but once, and that was a few days before he was gone. I had to travel 100 miles to get to see him play, and I wasn't disappointed. And about the first paragraph, I wrote, yes, this would be an apt question considering you won because of global reactionary boomer culture creation, foot soldiering, which is my take on him winning the Nobel Prize. In other words, what that means is that um, the Nobel Prize is this weird globalist award for people that have contributed to the culture, culture or arts and sciences, but especially with literature, it's to the zeitgeist. It's supposed to be like they've contributed to forming the zeitgeist, and it's globalist by definition, right? But one thing weird is that for someone like Dylan in the like 60s and 70s, you would see the Nobel Prize as something that is like everything you're against. But what ends up happening is that the the boomers who were reacting, let's say common people reacting against the war in Vietnam and all that stuff, went on to be the establishment and to control culture. So then they reward their most adamant foot soldier, and Dylan himself is probably not that, which is why he didn't take their call, but it still ends up that way. So he ends up being the guy that wins the award. Does that make sense? He was powerful and electrifying and had a commanding presence. I was only 6 feet away. He was mesmerizing. He says, "He looked older than 22, and something about him seemed permanent, and he filled me with conviction. Then, out of the blue, the most uncanny thing happened. He looked right at me, straight dead in the eye, and he transmitted everything, something I don't know what, and it gave me the chills," which sounds occultic, and it's kind of like a some sort of weird lightning rod transmission between artists, I guess. Now that can be taken as anybody listening to any powerful song and you feel like that it's speaking directly to you. I mean, this is what like I mean, even Sam Hyde talks about this. It's like when you get super fans and you get people who kind of spurg out over stuff and they see you in public when he does, and they go up to him and they say like, "How did you know to make this or to say this? Like you wrote it about me," and like he has to constantly say like, "It's not you, man. Like, I don't know you." Right? This is common amongst, like, great artists, right? That I don't know you personally. I wrote that, and it I'm glad you love it, but, like, chill. I think it was a day or 2 after his plane went down, and somebody I'd never seen before handed me a Lead Belly record with the song Cotton Fields on it, and that record changed my life right there and then, transported me into a world I'd never known. And it was like an explosion went off. Like I've been walking in darkness, and all of a sudden the darkness was illuminated. Illuminate, confirm. It was like somebody laid hands on me. I must have played that record 100 times. Interesting religious connotation there. He says, um, let's see. The lightning rod also will play a part when he starts talking about his three biggest inspirations. I'm gonna skip to this paragraph. He says, by listening to all the early folk artists, yeah, I like wearing hats. By listening to all the early folk artists and singing the songs yourself, you pick up the vernacular. You internalize it. You sing it in the ragtime blues, work songs, Georgia sea shanties, Appalachian ballads, and cowboy songs. You hear all the finer points and you learn the details. And I said, this is poetic, artistic voice, and it begins with imitation, especially in terms of vernacular. And I said also, unless you're a prodigy. So you pick up all these things and you imitate unless you are a prodigy and you are almost born wholly formed as an artist, like like Mozart. Mozart's really probably the only example I can think of someone who did this. I mean, even Shakespeare um, takes from other artists liberally, but I guess Mozart would be probably the one of the only examples of that. You know what it's all about. He says, taking the pistol out and putting it in your back pocket, whipping your way through traffic, talking in the dark. Okay. That's kind of cool because it's almost like he's I'm sorry, spouting song lines here bardically in the midst of the speech. That's kinda cool. You know that Washington is a bourgeois town, and you've heard the deep pitched voice of John the Revelator, and you saw the Titanic sink in a boggy creek, and you're pals with the Wild Irish Rover and the Wild Colonial Boy. You heard the muffled drums and the fifes that played lowly. You've seen the lusty Lord Donald stick a knife in his wife, and a lot of your comrades have been wrapped in white linen. Whoa, what's he talking about? Okay, so what he's talking about here is his absorption of cultural material and life material, right? Um, yeah, Mozart was made by his dad in terms of his business sense, but he wasn't made his dad trained him as a musician, but he didn't steal from other artists, right? Not that the stealing I've talked about stealing versus borrowing, but um, like Mozart knew Handel, right? But that was later. But I had something else as well. I had principles and sensibilities and an informed view of the world. It sounds like it, and I had that for a while. Learned it all in grammar school. That's Shakespearean, right? Shakespeare learned all of his at Henry VIII grammar school. Don Quixote, Ivanhoe, Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels, and Tale of Two Cities. All the rest. Typical grammar school reading that gave you a way of looking at life, an understanding of human nature, and a standard to measure things by. I took all that with me when I started composing lyrics, and the themes from those books worked their way into many of the songs, either knowingly or unintentionally. I wanted to write songs unlike anything anybody ever heard, and these themes were fundamental. So I said to write songs for the future, he uses themes from the past. Specific books that have stuck with me ever since I read them way back in grammar school. I want to tell you about three or four, three of them. Moby Dick, All Quiet on the Western Front, and The Odyssey. So it's pretty wild that Dylan's three big literary influences are pretty disparate works, right? Moby Dick, The Odyssey, and All Quiet on the Western Front. Now they do have a sort of a singular theme that drives through them, which is um, the physical travel or movement across spaces, but also this sort of spiritual journey that is within those. And also, of course, Dylan took his name from Dylan Thomas, which is pretty cool. We did a Dylan Thomas stream early on, and I think that that's important because, Dylan was born in 1941. Dylan Thomas died in 1953, and so they kind of overlap. And also, there's another weird connection here, which is that Dylan Thomas died at the Chelsea Hotel in New York, right after 17 straight shots of whiskey. I think that's the record. That's what he said. The last words. Of course, in the Constantine Fitzgibbon book, he talks about how Dylan Thomas was probably overdosed on morphine by his doctor there. Um, so he dies at 39, and then Dylan also is connected with Chelsea Hotel, in New York, and then later, Dylan dated Edie Sedgwick from the Factory, Andy Warhol's Factory, and he hung out in the West Village in New York. So there's a connection there, but there's more of an artistic connection, which is the the lyrical influence and the sound of the long lines that Dylan Thomas uses in some of his poems. For instance, in Fern Hill or The Forest Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower. Those are long poetic lines. In fact, um, they're almost Whitman-esque, but they are wholly Dylan Thomas. There's a great book by Dylan Thomas that anyone interested in him should read, and it's not his book of poems. It's actually one of his books of prose, and it's this one, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dog. He's a young dog. And I actually have a portrait of Dylan Thomas in the other room, a framed portrait. He's one of my one of my poet heroes. So he says, Moby Dick, which we've done an analysis on, right, which was Luciferian Monomania. Moby Dick is a fascinating book. I like his take on it. It's interesting. He says, a book that's filled with scenes of high drama and dramatic dialogue, a book that makes demands on you. That is a great sentence. The book makes demands on you. That's a pretty high IQ take, single sentence take on the way that a book works in terms of an artist's life. The plot is straightforward. He says, Ahab is an egomaniac. I said he was a monomaniac with a peg leg pursuing his nemesis, the great white whale Moby Dick, who took his leg, and he pursues him all the way to the Atlantic, around the tip of Africa, and into the Indian Ocean. He pursues the whale around both sides of the earth. It's an abstract goal, nothing concrete or definite. He calls Well, it's a concrete goal, but the way that he does it is abstract. He calls Moby the emperor, sees him as the embodiment of evil, right? He's a Leviathan. Ahab's got a wife and a child back in Nantucket, and he reminisces about now and again. Remember my take on Moby Dick. The whale and Moby Dick are kind of um, twin sides of a kind of weird Gnostic unity. You can anticipate what will happen. He says the ship's crew is made up of men of different races, and any one of them who sights the whale will be given the reward of a gold coin. A lot of zodiac symbols, religious allegories, stereotypes. Ahab encounters other whaling vessels, presses the captain for details about Moby. Have you seen him? There's a crazy prophet, Gabriel, on one of the vessels, and he predicts Ahab's doom, says Moby is the incarnate of a shaker god, and that any dealings with him will lead to disaster, which sounds like Harold Bloom. He says that to Captain Ahab. Another ship's captain, Captain Boomer, has lost an army to Moby, but he tolerates that and he's happy to have survived. He can't accept Ahab's lust for vengeance. This book tells how different men react in different ways to the same experience. A lot of Old Testament, biblical allegory, Gabriel, Rachel, Jeroboam, Bildah, Elijah, pagan names as well, Tashtego, Flask, Dagu, Fleece, Starbuck, Stub, Martha's Vineyard. The pagans are idol worshippers. Some worship little wax figures, some wooden figures, some worship fire. The Pequot is the name of an Indian tribe. Moby Dick is a seafaring tale. One of the men, the narrator says, "Call me Ishmael." Somebody asks him where he's from, and he says, "It's not down on any map. True places never are." Stubb gives no significance to anything, says everything is predestined. Ishmael's been on a sailing ship his entire life, calls the sailing ships his Harvard and Yale. He keeps his distance from people. A typhoon hits the Pequod. Captain Ahab thinks it's a good omen. Starbuck thinks it's a bad omen, considers killing Ahab. As soon as the storm ends, a crew member falls from the ship's mast and drowns, foreshadowing what's to come. A Quaker pacifist priest, who is actually a bloodthirsty businessman, tells Flask, some men who receive injuries are led to God, others are led to bitterness. Everything is mixed in, all the myths. The Bible, Hindu myths, British legends, St. George, Perseus, Hercules, they're all whalers. Greek mythology, the gory business of cutting up a whale. Lots of facts in this book. Geographical knowledge, whale oil, good for coronation of royalty, noble families in the whaling industry. Whale oil is used to anoint the kings. History of the whale, phrenology, classical philosophy, pseudoscientific theories, justification for discrimination, everything thrown in and none of it hardly rational. Highbrow, lowbrow, chasing illusion, chasing death, the great white whale, white as polar bear, white as a white man, the emperor, the nemesis, the embodiment of evil, the demented captain who actually lost his leg years ago trying to attack Moby with a knife. It's weird how a Nobel Prize acceptance speech turns into a kind of Allen Ginsbergian howl or a Walt Whitman esque song of myself in terms of the lyrical cadence. You can see he's a songwriter. We see only the surface of things. We can interpret what lies below any way we see it. Crewmen walk around on deck listening for mermaids and sharks and vultures following the ship, reading skulls and faces like you read a book. Here's a face. I'll put it in front of you. Read it if you can. Castigo says that he died and was reborn. His extra days are a gift. He wasn't saved by Christ, though. He says he was saved by a fellow man and non Christian at that. He parodies the resurrection. When Starbuck tells Ahab he should let bygones be bygones, the angry captain snaps back, "Speak not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me." Ahab, too, is a poet of eloquence. So that's exactly what Harold Bloom says, is that Ahab is sort of the supreme quasi Old Testament poet in terms of his cadence, but he's actually a sort of a Gnostic demiurge, um, Luciferian monomaniac. The last part was mine, but it's taken from Bloom in a way. He says, "The path to my fixed purpose is laid with iron rails whereon my soul is grooved to run." Or these lines, "All visible objects are but pasteboard masks." So that's interesting because that's what I was saying about Rolling Thunder Review. That brings me back to the mask. One reason why I think that it has a kind of a demonic aura to it is that uh, Dylan was inspired, if you didn't know this, Dylan was inspired to wear the mask, the sort of makeup mask for Rolling Thunder Revue because, and this is really weird, but because Sharon Stone went to one of the concerts and then her mom, um, let her in, and they got to meet Dylan, and Dylan was, he was talking to her, and she was wearing a Kiss T-shirt, and Dylan said something about, "Oh, you like that band Kiss?" And she was like, "Yeah," and she said, and Sharon Stone says that she said something about like, "Yeah, it's like kabuki theater." And that Dylan then said, "Yeah, but you never saw kabuki theater spit blood on the audience." And, Dylan knew of course, Dylan knew all about kabuki theater. I mean, Dylan and Michael McClure and Allen Ginsberg and Jim Morrison and the sort of 50s and 60s poets knew very well about kabuki theater. And it does have a strange influence on American music and literature and culture, especially of the time. But Dylan says that he then said, he said, there might be something to that mask thing. And I listen, nobody has to tell me. I mean, I really do not. I'm sorry, if you like Kiss, fine, but I've never liked Kiss. I've always hated them, and I especially do not. I'm not a fan. I'll just say that I'm not a fan of Gene Simons. I'm really not a fan of that dude at all. I just say that. I mean, like, very, very down into my core, I do not like him. But whatever. That's just me. But I do think it's interesting that sometimes, especially if you're an artist, you have to um you have to sort of witness or expose your mind to things that are unnatural to you in terms of the things that you like, right? So I don't think Bob Dylan likes Kiss either, but he did see that there was something about the makeup thing. So he used that first thing. And then what he goes on to say is interesting. He says, "You never see a man with a bare face tell the truth. It's always a bald-faced lie. If you want somebody to tell the truth, they got to say it from behind a mask." Okay, so I get what he's saying, but that is the opposite of what's ended up happening in the world we live in today, right? Now, Ezra Pound says about masks, right? Something in the middle, which is that in the Greek religious ritual of the theater, which is a Dionysian ritual, the characters who play the gods will wear the mask of the god, and that's practical and symbolic. So it's practical because the people in the back of the amphitheater cannot they can't see the facial expressions of the people on the stage, so they use still facial expressions to represent the emotion. That's why you have the thespian masks of the happy face and the sad face, right? The comedy and the tragedy. But it also becomes a religious ritual because it's tied up in the Bacchae and the kind of Bacchic rites or the Dionysian ritual, right? So what we've seen now in Great Reset era is that well, that's not true when everyone out there is wearing a MASQUE, right? In fact, that's just lies. Everything coming out from behind the mask is a lie because that's hiding truth. So it becomes an opposite world. Now, now in terms of the mask, like the personae, right? The personae as masks, do everyone naturally does wear masks metaphorically speaking. But one thing that he does is interesting because he did this like 30 years before Kanye did the who designed his mask? Not Rafe Simmons. Who was it that designed his masks for that Yeezus tour? Remember where he wore the mask? So that's kind of what Dylan is doing in the thing, but Dylan wears a pale face death mask, um, which is really interesting. Yeah, and we've talked about Mask of the Red Death in terms of correlations between Karanka and remember Boccaccio and the Decameron and Poe and how the Mask of the Red Death with Poe is based in the plague and the mask, it's a death mask. So it's not a red mask that Dylan's wearing. He's wearing a white, pale face, sort of John Donne-esque death mask. They got the death mask of John Donne, but the death shroud. But I see that as kind of that he's doing that because it's like part medicine show, part um part like weird minstrel troubadour, um some sort of like occultic commedia dell'arte. It's a statement on post-60s political life imbued into cultural life. But it's weird how that combined with like Scarlett Rivera as the fiddle player. She's the one who played on, you know, the Hurricane. She's the fiddle player you hear in the background, and she's kind of a gypsy Celt, um, Americana like crossover because she made a statement about how the fiddle is interesting because the violin you can play Tchaikovsky on it or you can play, you know, swamp music. So so I guess yeah, token study says it's about identity. So I suppose it depends on where you're going with your intention and your art. A lot of it obviously leads to ambiguity is built into it, right? Um, my favorite Dylan songs are um, Tangled Up in Blue, Simple Twist of Fate. I love Simple Twist of Fate. I love One More Cup of Coffee for the Road to the Valley Below. That song is obviously about death. And that's weird because Sam Shepard told Bob Dylan that art Bob Dylan asked him, how do you write these plays, man? How do you do this?" And Sam Shepard said, "Well, I speak to the dead." So that's interesting because whether whether he's an actual necromancer or not, I think there's something to be said for that's obviously something that is inherent in the poetic tradition, right? I mean, look at the Wasteland with Tiresias or Sophocles or the Aeneid or any of the old traditions. And when Bob Dylan talks about Moby Dick and especially the Odyssey or All Quiet on the Western Front, that's another aspect that ties those 3 together is this kind of speaking to or for the dead, um, which parallels the inner or the spiritual journey that the characters go on through the 3 books, right? Um, he says, let's see, yeah, he's Ahab is a poet of eloquence. He says, let's see. Ahab spots Moby. This is from again from his Nobel speech. And the harpoons come out. Boats are lowered. Ahab's harpoon has been baptized in blood. You remember that? Ahab is from the analysis we did. Ahab is forging his harpoon like Vulcan in the flames of the kiln beneath the deck. And it's hellish the way that it's described in the book. And then he comes out and like this kind of Luciferian lightning rod appears, and he's it's almost like Ahab is unified with the harpoon, and he wants to unify those 2 elements with the Leviathan in this kind of again, this sort of Gnostic monomania. On the 3rd day, another boat goes in, more religious allegory. He has risen. Moby attacks one more time, ramming the Pequod and sinking it. Ahab gets tangled up in the harpoon lines and is thrown out of his boat into a watery grave. Ishmael survives. He's in the sea floating on a coffin. And that's about it. That's the whole story. That theme and all that it implies would work its way into more than a few of my songs. He talks about All Quiet on the Western Front. He says, it's a horror story. You're stuck in a nightmare, sucked up in a mysterious whirlpool of death, a maelstrom of death and pain. You're defending yourself from elimination. You're being wiped off the face of the map. Once upon a time, you were an innocent youth and big dreams about being a concert pianist. Once you loved life and the world, and now you're shooting it to pieces. Day after day, the hornets bite you and worms lap your blood. You're a cornered animal. You don't fit anywhere. The falling rain is monotonous. There's endless assaults, poison gas, nerve gas, morphine, burning streams of gasoline, scavenging and scabbing for food, influenza, typhus, dysentery. Life is breaking down all around you. The shells are whistling. This is the lower region of hell. It's actually not the lower region of hell. That would be one of the mid regions. Mud, barbed wire, rat filled trenches, rats eating the intestines of dead men, trenches filled with filth and excrement. Someone shouts, "Hey, you there, stand and fight." Who knows how long this mess will go on? Warfare has no limits. You're being annihilated, and that leg of yours is bleeding too much. You killed a man yesterday and you spoke to his corpse. You told him after it's over. I like how he changes to the second person here. He's talking to the reader here. He's talking to his audience, but he's talking to the reader because I think that's telling because instead of talking in the first person and the third person about Moby Dick, now he's talking in the second person. He's directing it to you. He's directing it to us because we're supposed to relate. We're supposed to play in, our lives uh are sucked up into All Quiet on the Western Front. Warfare has no and that's more relevant now than ever, really. Warfare has no limits. You're being annihilated. He says, um, "Leave me alone. I'll be back in a minute." Then you walk out into the woods of death, hunting for a piece of sausage. You can't see how anybody in civilian life has any kind of purpose at all. All their worries, all their desires, you can't comprehend it. He used this when he wrote that ballad of Ira. What's that guy's name? Ira Hayes. Who's the guy who he was an American Indian and he raised the flag at Iwo Jima? And then that one's a tough one because that dude died. He was very young and he went on that propaganda tour that they made him go on, and then he became a drunk. And I'm guessing my reading on it is that because he went to the dedication ceremony at Arlington, and then he died the next night. Like that night, he went out and got wasted, and then they found him like in a ditch. Post style. Ira Hayes, yeah. And that one's crazy because my take on it is that he did this thing, and he's a Marine in combat on Iwo Jima, and he's doing this thing, and he's selfless, and he's watching all these people sacrifice themselves for this death machine, and he's seeing all this death and destruction, and then he has to go on like they make him into this hero, and he can't understand why why he is allowed to do that, why he's there, right? So that's a tough one. I appreciate that one. And I think that definitely something like All Quiet on the Western Front plays into that. He says, "Merciless bastards, your shells are running out. Dead bodies are making retching noises. Someone will kill you and use your body for target practice. They're your prized possession, but soon your boots will be on somebody else's feet. It's not fair to come at us again soon," you say. One of your companions is laying in the dirt and you want to take him to the field hospital. Someone says you might save yourself a trip. What do you mean? Turn him over. You see what I mean. Sickness and humiliation have broken your heart. You were betrayed by your parents, your schoolmasters, and even your government. Um, as if the government, though, I said, is the final culmination of betrayal. I mean, I guess it is for him, or for that generation. That's why they see something in him because of the sort of governmental betrayal and war machine that continues into Vietnam. You're fighting. You get all these people, you get all these kids, who barely graduated high school because they're so young. They're just out. They're in the prime of life, and you send them off to fight as a Michael Aquino war game test for the eventual war that'll come back home for nothing for banks, right? Now, I'm not saying that is the case with every individual, for the individuals, because the individuals doing it obviously have honorable intentions. I'm saying that the machine that puts them there. So of course that sucks. I mean, why do you want to go fight for that? It's not a war of defense. It's not a war of defense of the faith. It's some bullshit, right? Some bullshit, you know, thing that is created by Intel and all this stuff, and then you go and you send all these innocent people off to do it for you. Of course, I know it's a hot take, right? Um, he says, "You've come to despise that older generation that sent you out into this madness, into this torture chamber. All around you, your comrades are dying from abdominal wounds, double amputations, shattered hip bones, and you think, I'm only 20 years old, but I'm capable of killing anybody, even my father, if he came at me." That's interesting. He puts that in there. Yesterday, you tried to. Oh, there was a thing about that in the book. I mean, in the movie, because somebody had to take on why Allen Ginsberg was on the tour with them, because Ginsberg is one of the constant figures on the Rolling Thunder Review, and they said, well, Ginsberg represented kind of a father figure to Bob Dylan, and they asked Bob Dylan about it, and they said what the other guy had said, and Dylan says, "No, man, Ginsburg was anything but a father figure. He ain't no father figure. He wasn't, he was not that. And I didn't know, actually, you guys, I didn't know um that did you know that Ginsburg and Peter Orlovsky, the poet, were relegated to being the baggage handlers for the for the Rolling Thunder Revue? That was how they were allowed to stay on. They the concert promoter was like, "Man, you gotta get these guys out of here," because he says there's a weird relationship between art and commerce. It's like we get what they were trying to do with art, but also that we have to finance this, and the people that we finance it for, they want the money back that they financed it with, and a little bit back more than that. Maybe that's why he did Joey. Maybe that's why he did the Joey song later. Who knows? Maybe that was part of the financing. Who knows? But anyway, he says so. We got to get rid of some of these hangers on. So they relegate Ginsburg. It's a 3 hour show, and he had like 30 minutes of reading his poems, and then they say, "All right, you're allowed to stay on. You're going to get 2 minutes." And Ginsburg says, "That's fine. That's fine." So they take it from 30 minutes to 2 minutes, and then they say, "Oh, and by the way, to make yourself useful on this, every morning when we're leaving the venue, or after the concert, when we get out of the motel, you got to take all the bags and you got to put them on the bus." So they end up being baggage handlers and gophers. That's crazy, right? Um, yeah, and Patty Smith we mentioned earlier, and so yeah. So he says, let's see. Oh, he talks about the fallen world here. He says, all that culture from 1,000 years ago, that philosophy, that wisdom, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, what happened to it? It should have prevented this. Your thoughts have turned homeward, and once again, you're a schoolboy walking through the tall poplar trees. It's a pleasant memory. More bombs dropping on you for blimps. You got to get it together now. You can't even look at anybody for fear of some miscalculable thing that might happen. The common grave. There are other possibilities. He says, then you notice cherry blossoms and you see that nature is unaffected by all this. Poplar trees, the red butterflies, the fragile beauty of flowers, the sun. You even see how nature is indifferent to it all the violence and suffering of all mankind. Nature doesn't even notice. You're so alone. Then a piece of shrapnel hits the side of your head and you're dead. You've been ruled out, crossed out. You've been exterminated. I put this book down and I closed it up. I never wanted to read another war novel again, and I never did. It's pretty cool. I like that he took so much of that. Um, he says, Charlie Poole from North Carolina had a song that connected all this. It's called "You Ain't Talking to Me," and the lyrics go like this. Here's the lyrics to this song, and this is cool because he quotes this in his Nobel Prize speech. He says, "I saw a sign in a window walking uptown one day. Join the army, see the world," is what it had to say. "You'll see exciting places with a jolly crew. You'll meet interesting people and learn to kill them too. Oh, you ain't talking to me. You ain't talking to me. I may be crazy and all that, but I got good sense, you see. You ain't talking to me. You ain't talking to me. Killing with a gun don't sound fun. You ain't talking to me." It's pretty cool. He says, "The Odyssey is a great book whose themes have worked its way into the ballads of a lot of great songwriters. The Odyssey is a strange Chase, you're gonna like this. Our friend Chase Haggard out there, songwriter. The Odyssey is a strange, adventurous tale of a grown man trying to get home after fighting in a war. He's on that long homeward journey, and it's filled with traps and pitfalls. He's cursed to wander. He's always getting carried out to sea, always having close calls. Huge chunks of boulders rock his boat. He angers people he shouldn't. There's troublemakers in his crew, treachery. His men are turned into pigs and then are turned back into younger, more handsome men. He's always trying to rescue somebody. He's a traveling man, but he's making a lot of stops. You also notice what he did here. He switched into the third person again. So All Quiet on the Western Front speaks to you as it speaks to him, right? It speaks to us, the audience and the reader. But the Odyssey seems to be something external to him. He's speaking in the third person, even though he's reading himself into it. So it's in versus out. He's stranded on a desert island. He finds deserted caves and he hides them. He meets giants, they say. "I'll eat you last." And he escapes from giants. He's trying to get back home, but he's tossed and turned by the winds, restless winds, chilly winds, unfriendly winds. He travels far and then he gets blown back to zephyrs. He's always being warned of things to come. Zephyrus, right? The god of the wind. Touching things he's told not to. There's two roads to take, and they're both bad. That's cool. I like that he says that because I read him say something about the psychotic breakdown and sort of psychiatric chasm that exists in the minds of some of the great poets, including Robert Frost. And he says, "And I got miles to go before I sleep." Remember, we did our stream on psychotic Robert Frost, and I think this is interesting because instead of two roads diverged in a in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, he says both roads are bad. He says both hazardous. One on one you could drown, on the other you could starve. He goes into the narrow straits with foaming whirlpools that swallow him. Meets six-headed monsters with sharp fangs, thunderbolts striking him. He tells his story to strangers. He changes identities. He's been gone 20 years. He's carried off somewhere and left there. Drugs have been dropped into his wine. It's hard to travel. In a lot of ways, speaking of drugs, I think there was that he's had a bunch of stalkers over the years, obviously. Like I was just talking about with people who stalk Sam and AJ, right? They're like, "You're writing songs to me, man. How did you know that I was blowing in the wind, man? You wrote it about me." And he's like, "Man, okay, you need to chill." Eventually, I think he had this stalker that was going through his trash and stuff, and then published something about him being a heroin addict. And honestly, I've always had that radar in my head that he probably was, and maybe still is. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. But certainly during Desire and some of his I mean, Dylan did say that when we lived in Greenwich Village, that he was strung out real bad. So, and that was the times and all that. But who knows if that ever stopped. But that guy went through his trash and said that. It's kind of like when Stefan King's wife went through his trash and found that the reason for him not remembering that he wrote Maximum Overdrive was the fact that he had a hardcore yayo habit. So, but then the guy broke in and Dylan beat him up, supposedly. So that's crazy. I know that I mean, the only time Jethro brought this up earlier, the only time you see Dylan, like, in public life is, like, that episode of Prawn Stars. You remember that? When they send Chum Lee out to get Dylan's autograph because he's playing in Vegas, and he finds Dylan on the street, and he says, "Can you sign this record for me?" And he says, "Oh, yeah, I remember doing this record." And he says, "What do I write on it?" And he says, "Make it out to Chum Lee." And so then they can't sell it because it's autographed to Chum Lee. I like Prawn Stars, good show. I saw Dylan. I saw him in 2015 in Richmond. And there's again, I'll just repeat it. There's a good joke Norm tells about when he went to see Bob Dylan in concert, and all the songs were different. He rearranged all the songs. That's one thing I don't like about what he does because he made a comment about people have these expectations of you and they want you to play the songs the same way. But he says, "Fuck it, I don't care about the expectations. I'm gonna play them how I want to play. They're my songs." So I understand that. And he has played like a billion places. Like at the end of Rolling Thunder, they show all of his concert locations, and he's played every year all over the world. I mean, he's constantly touring. So I get that. He doesn't want to play the same song over again. But it is kind of annoying because Norm said when he went to see him, um, that at the end he said, "All right, time to take a request. Who wants something?" And somebody said, "Play Tangled Up in Blue." And he goes, "I just played that one." And that actually is exactly what happened when I saw him in concert in 2015. The songs were unrecognizable. He put them all in some sort of like Billy the Kid, Wild West, you know, like Texarkana Spanish style with flames behind him. And it was like he sang Simple Twist of Fate, but it was like not the song. So so that was kind of annoying. But anyway, he says, let's see. It says, "So what does it all mean? He'll disguise himself as a filthy beggar, and a lowly servant kicks him down the steps with arrogance and stupidity." This is when Odysseus goes back home to Ithaca. The servant's arrogance revolts him, but he controls his anger. Remember, he has to kill all the suitors, right? And he finds Telemachus. He's one against 100, but they'll all fall, even the strongest. He was nobody. And when it's all said and done, when he's home at last, he sits with his wife and he tells her the stories. Now, there's an interesting thing about the difference between Greek and even Nordic mythology and Christianity. And the difference is that the gods will often disguise themselves as beggars to test the people in their homes. Remember when Zeus shows up and he's in disguise as a vagabond, and the husband and wife take him in, and then their reward is that they'll be intertwined as trees forever. Well, when Christ appears after the resurrection, he's not in the guise of anything. Like he's there and he's Christ, right? And when he goes out and he preaches, I know I'm not doing this justice at all, but when he goes out and he preaches, he's not in disguise, right? He's truthful up front. God is truth. So there's no masquerading, right? Um, there's no masquerading as something else. Yeah, Zeus comes in, Leda and the Swan, right? Um, he says, what does it all mean? Myself and a lot of other songwriters have been influenced by these very same themes, and they can mean a lot of different things. If a song moves you, that's all that's important. I don't have to know what a song means. I've written all kinds of things into my songs, and I'm not going to worry about it, what it all means. When Melville put all his Old Testament biblical references, scientific theories, Protestant doctrines, and all that knowledge of the sea and sailing ships and whales into one story, I don't think he would have been worried about it either, what it all means. Well, of course he was worried about what it all means because as we've said here, art and especially literature all boil down to two things. The meaning is, why are we here, right? What's our relationship to God, and what's our relationship to each other? How do we make it while we're here? And now the difference is asking the author or the poet what they mean by it, and you never get a good answer. And so that's why his answer is, I don't know, I just wrote it. So this is a good part. He says John Donne as well, the poet priest who lived in the time of Shakespeare. John Donne, who wrote my favorite poem of all time. My favorite poem of all time is Holy Sonnet 14, Batter My Heart. I think it's perfect. I don't think it's perfect. It is perfect. It's a perfect sonnet. It is a perfect, and the sonnet is the perfect poem. It is a perfect, it's perfect. And John Donne wrote that, after he was Jack Donne. He became John Donne. He was dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. But John Donne, when he was Jack Donne, he said, the cestos and the abydos of her breasts, not of two lovers, but two loves, the nests. Dylan says, I don't know what it means either, but it sounds good, and you want your songs to sound good. That's pretty, I don't know. That's kind of cool. He says, when Odysseus in the Odyssey visited the famed warrior Achilles in the underworld, Achilles, who traded a long life full of peace and contentment for a short one full of honor and glory, right? Better to live one day as a lion than a lifetime as a lamb. Tells Odysseus it was all a mistake. I just died. That's all. There was no honor, no immortality. Well, there's a figurative immortality because you remember his name, Achilles, right? And there's a literal immortality because there's an afterlife. Of course, Achilles is in Hades. And that if he could, he would choose to go back and be a lowly slave to a tenant farmer on earth rather than be what he is, a king in the land of the dead, that whatever his struggles of life were, they were preferable to being here in the dead place. That's what songs are too. Our songs are alive in the land of the living. But songs are unlike literature. They're just meant to be sung, not read. The words in Shakespeare's plays were meant to be acted on the stage, just as lyrics and songs are meant to be sung, not read on a stage, on a page. And I hope some of you get the chance to listen to these lyrics. So I said, this is kind of interesting because it shows Dylan is self-aware about the fact that it's weird that he's being awarded a Nobel Prize for literature. But because my take about all of this, to wrap this part up, is that um, Dylan, again, regardless of the reasons he was awarded the prize, which I've already mentioned, I do think it's wrong in the sense that it it's not literature, okay? Words have meanings, so it's not literature. And that's not to be elitist. It's just to say that Dylan is self-aware of that fact. That Dylan writes songs, and songs are meant to be sung. That's why they don't work on the page. Poems, however, are meant to be read on the page. They're meant to be seen on the page. Form and the content is they're meant to be heard in an auditory sense. Kind of like in my opinion, opera represents the sort of classical climax, the peak, the apex of art, because it combines poetry, right, with the libretto. It combines classical music. It combines drama with the stage and architecture on with the set design. It's all of those things wrapped into one. So it kind of supersedes everything else. But literature supersedes songwriting. Now, in terms of an artistic spectrum or maybe a pyramid, I don't know, let me make it firm. But that's not to denigrate songwriting. It's just a different thing, but it's not literature, if that makes sense. Now, literary works can be turned into songs, and poems by definition are are rhythmical and they are songs in the sense that the lyrics for a song are called such because they are from the lyric poem, which is based on the Lyre, lyre. Like Homer sang his poems in hexameters accompanied by a lyre, a musical instrument, a lyre kind of giving way to the lute and then the guitar. So there is a weird traditional transition there, but it's just they are not. They are not. The literature is not songwriting, but at least he's aware of that. Why am I getting this prize, man? I don't know. Right. Okay, let's go into let's see. Got an article here on how Sam Shepard helped create a classic Bob Dylan song. Sam Shepard is look at me, he's just kind of cool. He's just like that's young Sam Shepard. Sam Shepard's cool because he wrote he's a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. He wrote Barry Child. And he's a great actor. Sam Shepard played Chuck Yeager in The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. Remember that? And he was also General Garrison, which is weird that he's in this sort of propagandistic movie, but it's a good movie. That's a good movie where he plays General Garrison. Um, Amptown says, drops $5 super chat. What do you think is more emotionally provocative, music or literature? Um, Depends on what you mean by provocative. I think that I think that literature is more profound and emotionally provocative um, in a high IQ sense. I think that music appeals to a baser audience. And that's now obviously who's the one person in the world doesn't like music, right? I just think that it's meant for more. It's more in tune for an easily emotional manipulation by definition, and that's good and bad. But I think that when it comes down to it, I suppose in terms of provocative, maybe I'm reading your question as profound, but I think that literature is far more profound. Um, but that's also weird because it's like if I lived in some situation where I had the choice to be blind or deaf, I would be blind. That makes sense to me because I write poems myself. I'm literary. I love literature, and two of the great writers were blind when they wrote their masterworks. James Joyce went blind and dictated his works, and John Milton was blind and dictated Paradise Lost. And I think that I've seen everything. You know what I mean? So I could go without seeing more. Now I don't want to, but I could go without seeing more. But I don't think that I could live without music. I need to be able to hear. And also, if you can't hear, then you also can't really speak. So you kind of lose two senses. But but yeah, I guess it depends. Because I could go without reading more literature with my eyes, but I guess I could hear it, right? But I couldn't go without hearing music, I guess. Um let's see. So um songwriters on songwriting. Here's an article by a songwriter, and he says this guy says about Dylan, he says, "It's only natural to pattern yourself after someone." This is again imitation at the beginning of your artistic life. If someone wanted to be a painter, I might think about trying to be like Van Gogh or Van Gogh, as they say. Or if I was an actor, act like Laurence Olivier. That's interesting. I went to Olivier's drama school, Bristol Old Vic. If I was an architect, I won't show it to you guys. It's up there. See up there? Right up there under my shark, Bristol Old Vic. That's where I went. Florence Olivier's school. Um, if I was an architect, there's Frank Gehry. but you can't just copy someone. If you like someone's work, the important thing is to be exposed to everything that person has been exposed to. Anyone who wants to be a songwriter should listen to as much folk music as they can, study the form and structure of stuff that's been around for 100 years, is what Dylan says. And that's interesting because that's a almost Rambodian statement. 'Cause, Bob Dylan is kind of Arthur Rimbaud at the beginning of his life in terms of like in the Don't Look Back era, he clearly modeled himself on looking like a disheveled, vagabondish Rimbaud, who was lived from 1854 to 1891 and wrote Illuminations and A Season in Hell. He's my favorite poet. And Rimbaud said, to be a poet in A Season in Hell, in the voice of the poet in A Season in Hell, he says, one has to consume everything, all people, all actions. He says, I've taken a strong dose of poison. Um, and so that's very Bob Dylan-esque. But then when he talks about his inspiration, he says, my songs are based on old Protestant hymns or Carter family songs or variations of the blues form. What happens is I'll take a song and simply start playing it in my head. That's the way I meditate. So that's he says that about the times they are changing, that was basically a Carter family record. And and the Carter family record is just taken from an old Scottish folk song. So so that is very that ties into what Harold Bloom was saying about Moby Dick because he in Moby Dick, in his analysis of Moby Dick, he talks about how um Moby Dick in a way exemplifies what is called the American religion, which is a kind of combination of, you know, uh, mass Protestant Pentecostalism and Gnosticism. And that's essentially what Bob Dylan is tying into there, right? And um, talking about Bob Dylan's book Tarantula, he's got a book Tarantula, and I've never bought this book. I've read big parts of it in excerpts, but I've never actually bought the book. And mainly, well, for a number of reasons, but I used to every time when I was 17, I would go to Barnes and Noble after school like 3 times a week, and they had just put one in the city, and I would drive over there, and even now when I go to a bookstore, the first thing I go to is the poetry section, and my way of gauging, by the way, I've talked about this before, but my way of gauging whether the bookstore is any good or not is I go into the bookstore, I go into the poetry section, I go to R, and I see if they have Rimbaud, and then I go to H and see if they have Ted Hughes, and then I go to Dylan Thomas, and I can gauge the quality of whether they have those books or not. But Barnes and Noble, I would go into the poetry section. I remember when they issued Tarantula, and I would stand there and read the book, for a long time, and I never bought it. I just wanted to read it at the bookstore. But this is about Tarantula. It says that's his book of like collected prose poems, and he says, um, folk singing has come a long way since Guthrie and Pete Seeger, as witness the tumultuous ascendancy. Oh, this is about him. The ascendancy of Bob Dylan. In fact, the whole thing can represent the great divide between the square generation and the hip, so 60s, right? For those who can't quite make out Dylan's plaintive lyrics, either at his concerts or on recordings, his collection of prose poems should prove helpful. Though they rarely survive a second reading, the initial impact is surprisingly satisfying. Dylan's an apt mixer. Surrealism, Corso, Gregory Corso. I just talked about Gregory Corso on the Maddie stream on Digital Minefield and also on Boiler Room. And the link to the Boiler Room analysis stream that we did, I was on there for, I don't know, 3 hours the other night. Thursday. Catch me on Boiler Room. So hopefully, maybe we'll go back again, hopefully. And I've done 2 appearances there. And Boiler Room on alternate current radio, link in the video description. Shouts out to Hesher out there, Hesher and Ruckus and Spore, and also Grunt. Um, I talked about Gregory Corso there, and especially the high speed inventions of William Burroughs. We did a Burroughs stream. You see how we've done all this? Like, I think it's good. I think I'm proud of the fact for this channel that we've done so much of prerequisite work. So again, the works all relate to one another, and we've covered the works when they're brought up. So that's good. A nervous affection characterized by a melancholy stupor and an uncontrollable desire to dance is the word tarantism, and that's why I called the book Tarantula, because the bite of a tarantula is supposed to cause those things. He says the definition supplied by Webster isn't a bad guide to what Dylan is about in his weekly serial comic improvisations, which both satirize and excoriate the American scene. Interspersed between long passages are short, weirdo letters, probably taken off on Herzog. The newsreel type incidents, which touch on everything from politics, sex, drugs to Beau Geste and Dow, are alternately violent, hilarious, and not infrequently obscure. In general, a ball while it lasts. Beau Geste is the classic book about the French Foreign Legion. We ought to do a stream on French Foreign Legion one time because I consider myself a kind of a I don't know, it's a bit of a oxymoron here, but an amateur expert on the French Foreign Legion. I've got all the books up there above that shelf right there. But Beau Geste is a classic early 20th century work romanticizing the French Foreign Legion. So should we look at some lyrics here? Let's look at "Blowing in the Wind." Yeah. So "Blowing in the Wind" is amazing because, like, um, when I think of this song, I don't know what to make of it because looking at it with um, new eyes or in an objective sense and trying not to look at it in terms of all of the romanticization of the 1960s and kind of protest era and all that stuff. We just look at the lyrics of the song. The one thing that I take out of it is that it's slightly ecclesiastical, right? It says, "How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? And how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned?" The answer is blowing in the wind. So, what does that mean in terms of blowing in the wind? I mean, it's ambiguous, but is he saying here that um, everything is fateful? It's simply down to fate. What I would like to read into it is that it's ecclesiastical, and what I mean is in Ecclesiastes, it says, "The wind goeth toward the south and turneth up unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again." And that right there is like we see elements of that or echoes of that in Irish folk songs, in you know, Scots Irish hillbilly anthems, in Dixie blues, but also in things like even like in the Wind Cries Mary, the Jimi Hendrix song Wind Cries Mary, or in Landslide. Remember that song Landslide? By the way, the best version of Landslide is not the Fleetwood Mac version. It's actually Smashing Pumpkins. Billy Corgan does an I, maybe it's because I'd never heard the song before I heard Smashing Pumpkins do it on Pisces Iscariot, which is their B-sides album after Siamese Dream. But I love Smashing Pumpkins. Again, I'll say like Mayonnaise is one of the best songs I've ever heard. It's so good. That's because I'm 90s. Hey, this is a Gen X millennial take on Boomer Bob Dylan. So, of course, I love the Smashing Pumpkins version more than the Fleetwood Mac version. But that song is also like there's an ecclesiastical element to it, right? And he says, "Yes, how many years must a mountain exist before it's washed to the sea?" See what I mean? How many years? I mean, that's almost psalmic. That's almost like Psalms. And how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Speaking of Psalms, there is obviously an element of songwriters, especially singular songwriters in the 20th century, taking on a kind of Davidic persona, right? Because they're singing their songs about love and power in an almost oracular sense. Now, they're not specifically Christian or religious, obviously, but David is obviously the model for them. Or at least we could read that into them. Um, he says, "And how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? And how many ears must one have before he can hear people cry? And how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? It's a pretty profound song, right? When you look at it that way. And so we read Simple Twist of Fate. This one is one of my favorite songs. They sat together in the park. The evening sky grew dark, right? She looked at him and he felt a spark tingle in his bones. 'Twas then he felt alone and wished that he'd gone straight and watched out for a simple twist of fate. We were just talking about fate here, right? Um, which is we can see now where the Homeric quality or the Homeric and the All Quiet on the Western Front themes play into all of Dylan's songs with this, right? They walked along by the old canal, a little confused. I remember well, and stopped into a strange hotel with neon burning bright. He felt the heat of the night hit him like a freight train, moving with a simple twist of fate. A saxophone, someplace far off, played as she was walking on by the arcade. As the light burst through a beat up shade where he was waking up, he dropped a coin into the cup. Another blind man at the gate forgot about a simple twist of fate. Well, that's Homeric, right? He woke up. The room was bare. He didn't see her anywhere. He told himself he didn't care, pushed the window open wide, felt an emptiness inside, to which he just could not. I don't know why. That just that one hit me. Um, I think anybody who's been in love can feel that. So notice also that I mean windows and mirrors in literature are always supposed to be psychic, right? They're windows into the soul. It's supposed to the mirror is supposed to represent the the solidity of your mind with this kind of what do we call that? It's like how can I say this? The solid mirror, one can only see oneself as through a mirror, right? Or through a mirror darkly. And when the mirror fractures, it represents the fracture of the psyche, and with a kind of an emotional psychic break from a breakup of a relationship or whatever, when you open the mirror and you look inside, he's obviously looking inside himself. Now, he doesn't see himself in the mirror, but he's gone into the mirror, and what does he see? He sees emptiness. Um, he says he hears the ticking of the clocks and walks along with a parrot that talks. Hunts her down by the waterfront docks where the sailors all come in. Maybe she'll pick him out again. How long must he wait for one more time for a simple twist of fate? People tell me it's a sin to know and feel too much within. I still believe she was my twin, but I lost the ring. She was born in spring, but I was born too late. Blame it all on a simple twist of fate. Fucking great song, dude. Shelter from the Storm is a great song. I like his lyrics because in these songs because they're Whitman-esque. There's leaves of grass right here. They're Whitman-esque, and he even quotes this. He says, Whitman said, I'm large, I contain multitudes. And that's what a songwriter does. And I think in a way, Whitman, I mean, he had Ginsberg on that tour, I guess, because, Ginsberg is a clear representation of the Bardic Whitman character. And Ginsberg's poems, especially Howl, are meant to the past is prologue. They're meant to mimic the profundity and the enormity of America. He's trying to absorb America into his poems and make it kind of oracular for the future. And that's what Bob Dylan's lyrics tend to do. Like you notice a lot of his songs, the lyric sheet, the actual verses are not short. They're sort of they're longer. They almost become like they become profound, like they're wave like. And they have an interesting rhythmic structure. The rhyme scheme does not the rhyme scheme seems like it's you can't it's unpredictable. Um, Kid says, "Love Blood on the Tracks." Blood on the Tracks is great, and I think my opinion is that Blood on the Tracks is one of his, junkie albums, or at least it's a result of his junkie albums because of the obvious symbolism. The tracks are the track marks on his arms, to put it, blatantly, I guess, and the blood is that's like junkie symbolism, and it's also like the sacrifice that he's made. Um, we talked about his sacrifice earlier, so maybe the 2 are intertwined into one. Hey, shouts out to our friend Maddie out there. Panning out, but just say peace. Yeah, shouts out to you, homeboy. I love you. Um, so Shelter from a Storm was in another lifetime one of toil and blood. So this is all quiet on the Western Front again. When blackness was a virtue and the road was full of mud. That's Ezra Poundish, right? The clotted axle in the mud. I came in from the wilderness, a creature void of form. There's one thing to say about Dylan. I mean, his his phraseology and his word choice and his diction are certainly above normal songwriting. A creature void of form. So this is kind of a genesis, right? In terms of his own creation. I mean, Dylan did say that he thought that the purpose of life was to create. So, make things, or like Ezra Pound said, make it new. So that's an interesting concept. Um, and that seems to be powerful and purposeful and positive. The 3 Ps, right? Rather than imitative. But he says, and if I pass this way again, you can rest assured I'll always do my best for her. On that, I give my word in a world of steel eyed death and men who are fighting to be warm. Come in, she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm. Mhm. So again, yeah, honey like a crocodile, which is that there's a weird synchro there because I tried to watch the new um Peter Pan and Wendy movie today. And because I was thinking of doing something on Peter Pan, I'm not probably not going to, but about Peter Pan and you know, you seen the meme, right? About maybe Captain Hook isn't the bad guy because he's trying to stop Peter Pan, who is a pan figure. He's kind of a demonic figure who is taking the KIDS, flying out the window, right? So again, the symbol of the window, they're flying out the window or out of their psyche, time out of mind, as Shakespeare says, into Neverland where they never grow up, but it's an imitative heaven. Right, it's a never land. It's an Edgar Allan Poe Nevermore Neverland, place where they aren't actually are, into a some sort of weird psychic trauma where he can take them and use them for their immortality. Now, I know that's a reading into Peter Pan, and like, look, reading the J.M. Barrie book, it's like we can read this on 2 completely different levels. So there's a literal and a figurative level, and they are so far apart. I think that the book is fine. I think it's a great book. But when I read into the significance of what it represents, there's a darkness there, obviously. And it's weird that Captain Hook is he goes after Peter Pan and not them because maybe he's one of the lost boys who escaped and grew up and he they sacrifice his hand, it gets bitten off by the lizard people, by the crocodile, right? But he's still at war with them. And uh there's definitely I mean, look, the movie is called The Lost Boys, which is often forgotten about when discussing the Lost Boys movie, the vampire movie that we've talked about a little bit. We did our vampire stream. The Lost Boys is interesting because they are kids and they're trying to take other kids and they fly, but they fly because they're vampires and they're trying to take them to this never land. Well, they were where they will live forever by feeding on the psychic energy and the blood and the Arduino of the youth, right? By living a living death. So it's a false immortality. Chase sends 199 super chat. Shouts out to Chase out there. He says, "You think Dylan would be popular if he came out now?" Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think that um there wouldn't there he couldn't come out now, but there are versions of him that come out now, and that he definitely influenced the way that people make music now. I think that the obviously his musical form is a very 20th century form, right? A singer-songwriter with an acoustic guitar is they don't exist now. I was talking about Elliott Smith earlier, and he sort of is like Dylan in that sense, right? One man acoustic guitar, singing songs with a pretty high IQ vocabulary about things that are deep in people's souls. But that's rare. I mean, he's an indie guy, right? And I mean, who you got now? Ed Sheeran. Like, there's one Ed Sheeran song that I actually do like, and it's "I've Seen Fire," right, on the mountain. It's that song from The Desolation of Smog, and actually really, really like that song. I think that's a really brilliant song, mainly because I have like a I have a medieval minstrel playlist where, like, it's just Jethro Tull and, like, that song and a couple other ones, and it just reminds me of, like, sort of troubadour music, and so I think that plays in that plays into it, but he couldn't come out now. Now, if he were now, he would probably have to be some sort of avant-garde rap artist, maybe. I know Dylan liked Public Enemy because, for some of the same reasons that Dylan was popular, but for a different audience, but he respected that kind of kinship. But I don't think that that could exist now. I mean, it could exist now, but just not in terms of pop. It is weird that Dylan is was so pop, right? And Dylan like influenced the Beatles. Remember he caught up with the Beatles and he introduced him to that Devil's Lettuce in Hyde Park or whatever. Is that what y'all do? Is that what y'all do? Hold on, hold on. Is that what y'all do out here? Is that what y'all do? Y'all like coming out here and smoking that bubonic chronic in the moonlight? Is that what y'all do with yourselves? You like doing that? Don't tell me you like doing that. Coming out to Hyde Park and smoking some wacky tobacco with the dang Beatles in Hyde Park in the moonlight. That is why y'all need to listen. You need to learn how to fix a lawnmower. So, so I do think that I think that there are iterations of Dylan. But if you were going to be somebody important like that, it would not be Poppy. Now, obviously, what plays into that is culture creation and all of the probably the front groups and limited hangouts and human ecology fund that fund people like Allen Ginsberg who are on the tour with Dylan. There's one part in the movie where in Rolling Thunder Review where he talks about how one of the filmmakers was always paranoid. He didn't make friends on the tour because he was always paranoid that that his room was bugged. And Dylan says, I thought that was crazy, man. But then again, I mean, Roger McGuinn had, he was good with sophisticated electronics. So maybe the room was bugged. I don't know. And also, Nixon thing was going on and they were probably spying on us. So maybe he was right, which I think is interesting. Um, let's see. Elias sends 9.99 super chat and says Bob Dylan stream, bro. Boomers are going to be heated after this one. LOL. Let's go. Well, maybe they will. I mean, but maybe they won't. I mean, I stated that I appreciate um Dylan's art for what it is, certainly, and um I don't denigrate like what your parents thought when they listened to Bob Dylan. I don't I mean, that's cool. Like imagine you're an old man, right? And your kids come up and they're like, "Dad, you listen to the Sam Hyde remix of the Lil Uzi Vert song? That's cringe," right? And you're like, no, it's fucking cool. Like, it was awesome, and it's still awesome. So people don't have to listen to stuff, with exclusivity. Shouts out to Sammy 4.99 super chat. No comment. Thank you for that. Four. He sent me almost 5 quid. Thank you, Sammy. Appreciate you. Dylan was on Keith Sweat's song. Was he really? He was on a Keith Sweaty song? Do it, my pony. That's not Keith Sweat. Um, he says, let's see. Let's go back to Shelter from the Storm. Suddenly, I turned around and she was standing there with silver bracelets on her wrists and flowers in her hair. So this is like Age of Aquarius, right? This is like Aquarian. She walked up to me so gracefully and took my crown of thorns. Come in, she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm. So is he saying he took my crown of thorns because what's he saying there? Is he saying that took on she took away his his recognition of his own sin here? I don't know who's she? Is she supposed to be Sophia? Is this Gnostic? There's a wall between us. Something there's been lost. I took too much for granted. I got my signals crossed. Just to think that it all began on an uneventful morn. Come in, she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm. The wall between us is like that's like Tristan and Isolde. Oh, that's interesting because Dylan did say that um Reuben Carter later on approached him and said, "Are you still searching, Bob? What are you searching for?" This is after he got out of prison. And Bob said, "Yeah, man, I'm gonna keep searching." And he said, "What are you searching for?" And he said, "The Holy Grail." He said he was searching for the Holy Grail. So, look, if you're searching for the Holy Grail, then go to church and take Eucharist because that's what the Holy Grail is. That's my reading and my opinion, and that's not from nothing. I mean, I've told you I got a whole book here on Arthurian literature. That's my main. If anything is my main interest, it's that. But what does that mean, right? So Tristan and Isolde is right is sort of proto Romeo and Juliet. Remember, Ernest Hemingway said the thing in Our Time about how he thought that is it Pyramus and Thisbe? Thank you, Fuerte. Um, well, Tristan and Isolde as well. So archetypes of lovers with a wall between them. And he said that is it Pyramus and Thisbe when they're asleep, they've got this sword in between them, and it didn't make any sense unless it was the pointed edge. Well, I guess unless it was up on the long edge, but it's supposed to be figurative that there's a war between them, right? And that's kind of archetypal, I guess, because there's a war amongst the sexes or a kind of a conflict in terms of a relationship, but one has to make love out of war and tame the senses and the base passions in order to make life together. Suppose. Um, he says, "I've heard newborn babies wailing like a mourning dove, and old men with broken teeth stranded without love. Do I understand your question, man? Is it hopeless and forlorn? Come in, I'll give you shelter from the storm." That's almost Homeric, right? In a little hilltop village, they gambled for my clothes. I bargained for salvation, and she gave me a lethal dose. I offered up my innocence. I got repaid with scorn. Okay, wait a minute. So, bargaining for his clothes is a passion image, right? Or an image out of the crucifixion. And but he's bargaining for his salvation. So is this him selling his soul to Sophia? Question. When I'm living in a foreign country, but I'm bound to cross the line. Beauty walks a razor's edge. Oh, there's the razor's edge. There's the Pyramus and Thisbe knife, the blade, the razor's edge. Also, I've seen a snail crawl along the edge of a straight razor. Perfect, genuine, crystalline, complete. I hate them with their nabobs. Apocalypse Now. Um, he says, if I could only turn back the clock to when God and her were born. So that is Gnostic, isn't it? So give me shelter from the storm. All right. What about you're gonna make me lonesome when you go? Is probably my favorite one because he mentions Rambo. Great rhyme. He says, I've seen love go by my door. I've never been this close before, never been so easy or so slow. Been shooting in the dark so long. Is that his drug addiction? Are you an assassin? Um, No, sir. I'm a soldier. You're an errand boy sent by grocery clerks. Collect the bill. Been shooting in the dark too long. When something's not right, it's wrong. Is that him shooting up? Dragon, he says, dragon cloud so high above, I've only known careless love. It's always hit me from below. This time around, it's more correct, right on target, so direct. You're going to make me lonesome when you go. Purple clover, Queen Anne's lace, crimson hair across your face. You can make me cry if you don't know. Can't remember what I was thinking of. You might be spoiling me too much love. You're gonna make me lonesome when you go. Flowers on the hillside, blooming crazy. Flowers on the hillside, blooming crazy. Crickets talking back and forth and round. Blue River running slow and lazy. There's your impression. I could stay with you forever and never realize the time. And then he says, situations have ended sad. Relationships have all been bad. Must have been like Verlaine and Rambo. Which is interesting because Verlaine pursued Rambo across the countryside. That's why that, in my opinion, is why Rambo ended up uh, walking across the Italian Alps and being a vagabond all over the whole world and trying to get away because not only of his poetic nature and what he was trying to accomplish in a season in hell and eliminations, but because this creep was coming after him, and Verlaine ended up shooting him in the wrist. Remember, and then um, he was convicted of being a SODOMIST, right? Poor Rambo was just trying to get away. Ended up being a gun runner in Africa. Um, situation. He says, "I look for you in old Honolulu, San Francisco, Ashtabula. You're gonna have to leave me now, I know, but I'll tell you in the sky above, in the tall grass, and the ones I love. You're gonna make me lonesome when you go." He sees her in the sky and in grass. So she has been absorbed into nature, right? Yes, Tom Verlaine was in television. That's right. Not Paul. We're talking about Paul Verlaine. I like the song Mozambique. Um, I like to spend some time in Mozambique. I like that song. Gotta serve somebody. Let's try and finish up here with gotta serve somebody. Listen, shouts out to everybody who's stopped by. Thank you for supporting me, dropping those super chats. You can also drop donations in the dono chat, and you can really help me out by dropping some donations in PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo. I would certainly appreciate those a lot. And I also want to give a special shout out to Adam, who this is a sponsored stream for Adam, who said that he wanted me to do a stream on Bob Dylan and Bob Dylan lyrics. So shouts out to Adam out there. Also, thank you again to Boiler Room, who had me on earlier this week, and to Maddie at Real Tudor Brown Digital Minefield, who had me on. So yes, please support me if you can. Like and share the stream, y'all. We're trying to get these streams out there. I mean, we're doing well. We're doing well. That last one, what was the last one on? Not Cormac McCarthy. You know, that one did pretty well. The last one was a week ago. The last one we did was we did so many that I lose track. Was on Condor. Please go back and watch my Condor Robert Redford CIA trilogy analysis. You know, trying to get up to 1,000 views on that. We're trying to get, you know, I mean, I'm thankful for everything we got. I'm trying to get 1,000 views consistently now on the channel. So please go back and watch that Condor stream. I thought that was pretty good. We talked about sneakers and 3 days of the Condor, 6 days of the Condor, the book. And we got a lot more material coming up. And if you want a sponsored stream, you can drop me a fat chat, $100 to do a book. And you can get me to do movies. We'll be on David Patrick Harry again soon on Church of the Eternal Logos. And we got a lot more coming up. So last song I'll do is Gotta Serve Somebody. And this is AJ's favorite Dylan song. And he says, you may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You may like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. Dylan says, well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. You might be a rock and roll addict prancing on the stage. You might have drugs at your command, women in a cage. You may be a businessman, it sounds like it, or some high degree thief. They may call you doctor, they may call you chief. Ooh. You may be a doctor and they may call you chief. Is this predictive of Dr. Flossie? And is he representative of the former that he just mentioned that you're gonna have to serve somebody? Maybe the devil, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Now, Dylan already said that he's continuing his long career because originally, he signed over that deal and he's gotta, he's gotta pay before he gets his check cashed. So that's interesting in terms of how he's putting this. You may be a state trooper, you might be a young Turk. Oh, I bet AJ don't like that. Um, you may be the head of some big TV network analysis we just did. You may be rich or poor, you may be blind or lame, you may be living in another country under another name, but you gotta serve somebody. You may be a construction worker working on a home. You may be living in a mansion or you might live in a dome. You might own guns and you might even own tanks. You might be somebody's landlord, you might even own banks, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. You're gonna have to serve somebody. You may be a preacher with your spiritual pride. You may be a city councilman taking bribes on the side. You may be working in a barber shop. You may know how to cut hair. You may be somebody's mistress, maybe somebody's heir, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Might like to wear cotton, might like to wear silk, might like to drink whiskey, might like to drink milk. You might even eat caviar. You might like to eat bread. You may be sleeping on the floor, sleeping in a king size bed, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. He says, "You may call me Terry. You may call me Timmy. You may call me Bobby. You may call me Zimmy." People do actually call him that. You may call me RJ. You may call me Ray. You may call me anything, but no matter what you say, you're gonna have to serve somebody. Damn. Villain dropping some bars there, huh? And then ain't no righteous man, no, not one. He says, when a man he serves the Lord, it makes his life worthwhile. It don't matter about his position. It don't matter about his lifestyle. Talk about perfection. I ain't never seen none, and there ain't no man righteous, no, not one. Sometimes the devil likes to drive you from the neighborhood. He'll even work his ways through those whose intentions are good. Some like to worship on the moon, others are worshiping the sun, and there ain't no righteous man, no, not one. Look around. You see so many social hypocrites like to make rules for others while they do just the opposite. You can't get to glory for the raising and lowering of no flag. Put your goodness next to God's, and it comes out like a filthy rag. In its city of darkness, there's no need of the sun. And there ain't no man righteous, no, not one. Done so many evil things in the name of love, it's a crying shame. I never did see no fire that could put out flame. Put your hat down, baby. Pull the wool down over your eyes. Keep it talking, baby, till you run out of alibis. Someday you'll account for all the deeds you've done. Well, there ain't no man righteous, no, not one. When I'm done, when I'm gone, don't wonder where I be. Just say that I trusted in God and that Christ was in me. Say he defeated the devil. He was God's chosen son. Based right there, at least for that album. That's pretty cool. I like that. What else we got? I don't think I'll go over Mr. Tambourine Man. Because we don't need to really go over that one anymore. But I was gonna read something from the Odyssey here. Let's see. This is from the Odyssey. This is the beginning of the Odyssey. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western isles have I been, which bards and fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of wide expanse that I've been told, the deep browed Homer ruled as his demean, yet I did never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and hold. This is Keats on Chapman's Homer. Then felt I like some watcher out of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise. silent upon a peak in Darien. And Darien is the Isthmus of Panama. I wrote all the poem serves here as a prologue, albeit anachronistic, similar to the choruses in Henry V, right? Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. Um, it's also the site of a failed site of a failed Scottish colony. It's the New World or the other place, alien um, to European man and civilization. And that's a kind of a preface to the Odyssey. And I think that maybe I should have read that at the beginning. But that serves as kind of a weird preface to Bob Dylan, doesn't it? Um, so again, there's Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass right there. Um, if you are interested in music journalism, Lester Bangs might be a good place to start. This is Lester Bangs' Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung. And then got Dylan Thomas's collected poems right here. Um, and then maybe one of the reasons I realized why they put Bob Dylan in the Nobel Prize category is because he was published early on in Norton. Norton published Mr. Tambourine Man early on in its 70s edition, which kind of elevates him into the canon. Yeah, 1973. I've had that. It's one of my favorite editions right there. I've had it for a while. If you're interested in music biographies, one of the best here is check out Miles Davis. This is a great biography. I mean, this has nothing to do really with Bob Dylan, but in a way it does. So don't come at me, bro, about Miles Davis and Bob Dylan have nothing in common, right? Well, they're both American musicians, so they got something in common. And there's a lot more in common there in terms of their musical journey and style than people might realize. But this is a great book. This is an awesome music biography. Um, I found a correlation with Bob Dylan and the Rolling Thunder Review in terms of some of the Weimar art. And this is a great book on Weimar art, and you can see the kind of Man Ray uh, photography right there and the painted faces. And this is the erotic world of Weimar Berlin. And aren't we kind of living in Weimar right now in a way? Um, and then this is Allen Ginsberg's Snapshot Poetics, which has one of the famous photograph of Bob hanging out with Allen Ginsberg and Michael McClure outside of City Lights Books, and also when Bob and um, Allen went to Jack Kerouac's grave in Lowell, Massachusetts. I went there with my friends. But this book. So yeah, and somebody said, let's see, what'd you say? Kevin said Miles Davis had many phases like Dylan. That's absolutely true. Good insight. Um, his Spanish phase, Miles Davis' Spanish phase, going on for his this sort of experimental improvisational um electronic jazz phase in the 70s, very similar. Somebody brought up Joni Mitchell, and I gotta say one thing about Joni Mitchell. I've always, I have nothing to say about Joni Mitchell, really. I just don't care until one there was one turn I had in that, and that was when when I was about 13 or 14, and Green Day's side project covered um Pave Paradise and put up a parking lot. What's the name of that band? It's Billy Joe's side band, and I liked their version of it, but I didn't care about the Joni Mitchell version, but they did a punk version of it. And then again, when I was watching Rolling Thunder, and I realized that they're hanging out at Gordon Lightfoot's house. Gordon Lightfoot just died like May 1st or something like that, and Bob Dylan's 82nd birthday was like 2 days ago or something this week. But they were at Gordon Lightfoot's house, and she sang her song "Coyote," and then I went back and watched the live version from The Last Waltz, and I was like, "This is a good song. That is really a good song." It blew me away how good it was. And I know Joni Mitchell's importance in terms of singing, songwriting. Also, to mention Joan Baez, it's like, Dylan and Joan Baez had their thing, and like, who cares about Joan Baez? But um, like, they split up or whatever, and it's like, can you blame him? This lady yodeling in his ear all the time. But Joan Baez is better looking now than she was back then. She looks like she looks like a nice distinguished lady or whatever. She's all right. Whatever. Is she still alive? Yeah, Green Day had a couple of side projects. One was Foxborough Hot Tubs, and the other one was oh shit, what's it called? Oh shit. Damn, what's it called? I can't. Somebody look it up for me. Pave Paradise and put up a parking lot. Green Day side project. Damn it, they were good. I'm gonna look it up. Um, give me a list. Give me a second here. I got a list. Oh, Pinhead Gunpowder. That's it. Yeah, Pinhead Gunpowder. Um, yeah, not the Counting Crows version. I hated Counting Crows. If you like Counting Crows, that's fine. That's cool. You know why I hated Counting Crows? Because I didn't like that dude Adam Duritz. I didn't like how they were too soft, and I love the Black Crows. And I loved Black Crowes Southern Harmony Musical Companion. That's like a perfect album for me. Um, I used to listen to that all the time. When I mowed grass in the summer when I was like 12 and 13 years old, I would listen to that song that album on repeat. I listened to Southern Harmony Musical Companion, um, uh, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which is an Al Crowley album. And or at least title now. I didn't know that when I was 12. Come on, 11 and 12. And still like one of the best albums of the 90s though. And what else was the other one? And The Doors Live is what I would listen to. But yeah, Pinhead Gunpowder had a version, and I don't know about the Counting Crows version. Mr. Jones and me. How does he sing? Mr. I can't do it. He sings like Pee Wee Herman. No, I'm not trying to denigrate their band, but I like the Black Crows. Um, yeah, I just didn't like how they were so he's like Adam Duritz. He's just so soft, dude. I like the Black Crows. They were cool. All the girls I knew liked Adam Duritz and all that. I hope nobody takes offense at that. Somebody probably will. Whatever. As we said in the beginning, music is so personal, right? So personal. So many people. So yeah. So I guess that's about it, y'all. The last thing I'll say is there was something else about Rolling Thunder. Uh, Joni Mitchell. There was Joni Mitchell. There was Elliott Smith. There was the Nobel Prize. Allen Ginsberg mentioned. There was something else about oh, maybe it was The Last Waltz. Um, it's interesting how Scorsese, uh, is such a big filmmaker in the lives of, like, exposing his era of music, um, to the public, and I think that that's pretty cool. Martin Scorsese was also a cameraman on Elvis's live movie before he made any of his feature films, and then he did The Last Waltz, and, that's a great concert film. The best part of that for me is when Van Morrison comes on and sings Caravan, because Van Morrison is like a good example of this guy who he looks like a he looks like the inside of a chicken McNugget, and he's wearing like a maroon jumpsuit open to here with a big collar, and he's just not a rock star looking dude, but man, that boy can sing. He sings the hell out of that song, and there's something magical about you gotta admit it is amazing when you go and you watch a band live, like you watch The Band, and it's like these dudes standing on the stage, and they're all playing different instruments, and then when they play them together and they're in harmony, and it creates something out of it's like there was emptiness before and there was silence, and now there's beautiful music, and it's otherworldly how that can exist. God gives us that. So I love the part of Caravan. I also love Van Morrison because he's from Northern Ireland, of course, and he's from Hollywood and Ulster, County Antrim, and he was actually my friend Alexis's neighbor in Northern Ireland. He always goes to this pub, and so anyway, and there's one song I like where he talks about Sandy Row, and That song Caravan is amazing, Astral Weeks and all that, but yeah, he sings Caravan. Van Morrison and Jim Morrison met, they sang together at a club one time, and they had a kinship also because Morrison, but also they were both Scots-Irish, but anyway, at the end of Caravan, "Turn it up," he's at the end of it, he's still the song is still going on, and he mouths the words like, "Fuck this, that's it," and he walks off stage in the middle of the song, and it's so cool how he does it, because it's like, you gotta well, not you have to, but I admire artists who, like, don't give a shit in a way, like, they just like, my friend Andrew and I were talking about how, he sent me a clip of when Billy Idol was on David Letterman in 1984, and Idol comes out, and there's this part and I like Letterman. Well, I've talked about Letterman before with Norm. There is this part in the interview where Letterman says, "When you go places, do people recognize you? Do they know who you are? Do they just look at you?" And Billy Idol says, "Yeah. Yeah, they know who I am." And you're like, this guy is so cool. I mean, it's cool how, like because nobody else in the world looks like Billy Idol, like, he's clearly Billy Idol, and, like, he has this he's a superstar, he's a rock star, and he's just got this thing, and he just doesn't give a fuck, and that's cool, and I like how Van Morrison is, like, this little guy, and he's got this voice, and he just looks ugly, and his singing is beautiful, and his songs are beautiful, and he just doesn't care. I like that. I even like it about Dylan, and his sort of response to some people. It's like he doesn't care what they want or don't want. He's just gonna keep doing whatever it is. Now that's just about, in terms of how he feels about his own music and doing concerts. We talked about the rest. So all in all, I guess my take, for Dylan is that he's like a lot of musicians. It's like they're never we live in a fallen world, and people you don't need another hero, right? The people, they're just people. He's just a guy, he's just a human being. So you know he's not going to be perfect. um and you can hate or love his songs, you can take it or leave it. People can have complex relationships with art, but at the same time, i don't like I don't like the negative aura of some of the things that come off of his songs. I don't like where he went with his life and all that stuff, but I do appreciate his music for what it is, and the good parts. So, and who knows? I don't know, hopefully he didn't sell his soul to that commander in chief of the princes and principalities of this world and all that. He probably did though. But there's sort of some of a Gnostic take on some of his literature that comes out of that, and that makes sense because that seems to be what Harold Bloom called the American religion. So it makes sense that it would be like that. But you can be a Gen X millennial and appreciate music from a previous generation or from any time for what it is, without being exclusive to your own stuff. But it's important to remember, I think that it's important to remember that like art has to be new, and especially the new art being new. There's new stuff now. And that seems to be a problem as people get older, especially like and people my age that um they don't want to listen to anything new because it's not as good as the old stuff. Well, that's not true. Just like the people who are younger don't wanna listen to anything older because there's nothing from that can do anything for them, and that's not true. You have to have an expansive eye and ear for, um, the things that work, right, and the things that are beautiful. So, I guess that's about all I got, you guys. Um, hope y'all have a good night. What is this, Saturday? I think JD's streaming soon, or is he now? He might be on now. But yeah, we'll be around, and we got a bunch of stuff coming up. And don't forget, you can drop a sponsored stream. You can support me at any time. Oh, hold on, I gotta. Yo, look at that. There's $20. Thank you for that $20 PayPal from Rachel J. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Rachel J. Out there. Thank you. That means a lot. Let's go. Also, before I forget, you know what? I need another cigarette, and then we're gonna end it. Hold on, give me a second. Turn it up. Turn it up. Do it loud. Turn it up. Now. Now I'm singing Caravan. Y'all got me singing Caravan by Van Morrison. Little bit louder, turn it up. As the evening sky grew dark, he felt a spark tingle through his bones. 'Twas then he felt alone. He wished he'd gone straight. Simple twist of fate. So, before we go, mm, Toledo says there's good modern music today. You just have to put the work in to find it out. Now, look, yes, she's exactly right. You got to put in the work. And I think that, I mean, I'm weird in terms of music. I got to admit, I'm weird. Oh, oh, Rachel, was that you? Rachel J, was that you, Mama? Thank you so much, Mama. I appreciate you. I mean, I didn't know that. I don't want to dox anybody either, but yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mama, for that $20. I appreciate you. And yeah, but I'm weird in terms of my music taste because I don't know if I'm weird. I mean, I just like music. And I've got a billion CDs here and a whole thing of albums in there. And I love music. And the first music I ever liked though was Mozart. Mozart was my hero when I was 5 years old, and that's because I started taking piano lessons because of Mozart. Because when I was in kindergarten, in the lower school library, we call it lower school in private school. We don't call it elementary school. We call it lower school. We call it upper school. We're not like those puppies. Uh, there was a book on Mozart, and there was a picture in it of him sitting in Marie Antoinette's lap, and I thought she was hot. And I'd seen the movie Amadeus when I was 4 on HBO at a hotel in Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, when we went there with my family, and I like, I just and then I read this book, and I thought it was so cool, so then I was taking piano lessons, and I learned to play music by ear, and Mozart learned that, and then when I read that he had written his first, some of his first music when he was, like, 7, I started writing fake sheet music, and I still love Mo I mean, I went to his house in Salzburg, and I got a lot of Mozart stuff. I've always loved Mozart, but then the second music that I liked was Elvis, and that's because my mom came back from, visiting my aunts and my grandparents down south, and, she stopped by Graceland with my aunt, and they got me an Elvis. I might still have that. Let's see. I got it right behind me somewhere. It's an Elvis tape, and she gave that to me when I was, like, oh, probably 7, and so I loved Elvis, and then I liked Guns N' Roses because my friend gave me Appetite for Destruction when I was in 1st grade, and then Lies for my birthday in 2nd grade. And you know when you open up the tape of the cassette of Lies and you see what's inside? Um, he was like, "Check this out," and I was like, "Fuck yes!" And we actually we learned to cuss by listening to Guns N' Roses and Easy E, Easy Does It, and we would quiz each other on the cuss words. Um, so I don't know, but I like all music, really, all eras, and, there's a lot of good new music out there, even stuff that is like, people my age would probably have no idea of, I like. So, I don't know, like, Playboi Carti's kind of fallen off, and his music is, demonic or whatever, but I like some of the beats in his music, and I even like some Travis Scott music. The Travis Scott, um, album with Rodeo on it is, like, that and 90210, that's a great album, that's really good. That was kind of an indie album before he was big, that was his first album. And but mainly I listen to electronic music. I listen to electronic music, house music. I like 90s trance, I like electro house. I hate dubstep. Um, uh, and, I liked, I like 2000s era, like, Death Cab for Cutie. I listen to the Fuel song "Shimmer." I like the Limp Bizkit album now that I hated back then. I actually like that now. I'll listen to it. Like, it's actually really good. But, and then, of course, I like The Doors and Led Zeppelin, but I also um I like everything, I like French pop, I like French electronic music, I like '70s boomer music, I like Aphex Twin, um, I obviously like drum and bass and jungle. I like rap music, I like '90s gangster rap, I like rap now, um, so whatever, I like '90s pop music, check out my Ace of Based playlist on, SoundCloud that I put in the community tab. So, I don't know. I don't know Thousand Knives, but I like The Knife, Karen Dreyer Anderson, right? I like, Fever Ray. Uh, you know that my favorite of all time and my dream girl is Charlie XCX, starting with the Super Ultra mixtape. I like the Tyler Creator album, Igor. I think that's a great album. That's the only one I like of his. I'm a goblin. Uh, I like Gucci Mane, right? I'm so icy. All these girls excited. Ooh, they like it. I'm so icy. Huh. But really, I mainly like listen to electronic music and I like Washed Out. I like Chill Wave. Um, whatever. So yeah, go to my community tab and go to my SoundCloud list and go to the Ace of Base list. There's also a couple other playlists in there from way back when. Um, yeah, I would go to a bluegrass festival. Um, I like Ofra Haza. I like 90s Japanese alternative music. I turned on MTV 90s the other day, just like when I saw it on the TV, and they were playing the song, and the video was it was so 90s, and I was like, "Who the fuck is this?" And you know what it was? It was Luscious Jackson, um, the song Ladyfingers. It's a good fucking song. That's a good song. I even like some Hole songs. I love Nirvana back in the day. Obviously, Stone Temple Pilots. I like 311, Sublime. Shouts out to Jethro with 311 out there. You know, Yell is one of my favorites. Yelle, which is like listen to Pop Up or Safari Disco Club. What have I been listening to recently? Let me look at my playlist recently. Um, let's see. Jizza Liquid Swords. Um, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, right? You remember that Mighty Mighty Boss Tones song, the impression that I get? I was listening to Enrique Iglesias the other day. Bailamos. London Beat. Dude, have you heard the Heidi Montag song produced by Spencer Pratt? I'll do it. It's based on that Aisha Erotica song or whatever. Listen to the sped up version of that Heidi Montag song. It's got a good beat to it. I like this dude Starlink. I was listening to like 1998 era Quasi, Elliott Smith. Have you guys heard Suicide Boys? Have you heard Suicide Boys running through the seventh? That's a dark song. That's a dark song. Julian Casablancas on Daft Punk. Let's see. The Dream. You guys ever heard The Dream? That song Yamaha. Listen to that. That's a dope song. Mike Jones, Delirium, The Silence featuring Sarah McLachlan. Playboy Cardi, Molly. New Chromeo song. I've seen Chromeo 3 times in concert. Yo, I like that riff raff. I want a Ferrari. I want a Ferrari. Wanna drop my top, feel my braids in the breeze. 488 with the cherry seats. I like Me and Mrs. Jones, Billy Paul, High Hopes, Pink Floyd, Bobby Valentino. Shouts out to Block Party because he knows that Tamia is my girl. I like that song Into You. Romy from the XX. Her song "Enjoy Your Life," the new Rex the Dog album, Electro. I love that. Love Rex the Dog. Damian Lazarus, Into the Sun. Let's see what else. The new Subtract album is gonna be really good. I like new stuff like Pastel Ghost and sort of like Sigma music. Yune Pinku. I love Yune Pinku. She's Malaysian Irish. She's a Malaysian Irish girl. I'm not sure if she's Republican Irish or Northern Irish. She's good. She's Malaysian. I mean, that's like a weird connection to me, I guess. But listen to Yune Pinku and her song Heartbeat. She's a small artist. And I like The Weeknd. I like The Weeknd's Double Fantasy. I mean, that's a good song. Yeah, say what you will about The Weeknd and his, of course, his fucking rituals and shit. But listen to The Weeknd, Double Fantasy. You don't have to buy into the music to listen to it. But that's a good song. Anyway, so that's about it for that. Let's see if we got anything on the dono chats before we go away. Mm, I think I gave a shout out to Evan T last time. He donated $20 on dono chat. And we had one come in the other day. Let me check. Where's my where are my super chats? Yeah, let's see my super chats here again. So yeah, shouts out again to Sammy, Elias, Chase, Amptown. Thank you so much. Shouts out to our friend Nate out there for that 9.99 super chat. They came in and let's see, we had another one. Let's see. Shouts out to Adam for supporting us here. And let me check it one more time and then finish up. Yeah, there was one that came in today, and that was from shouts out to Scott out there for that super chat he sent me earlier today. That was really cool. Thank you so much. So that's about it, y'all. If you want to see me do anything, please leave comments. Please leave a comment after the stream is over. Burt Backrack, yeah. Oh yeah, we were just talking about Burt Backrack the other day when we were talking with Maddie about um the Last Shadow Puppets. I love the Last Shadow. Now their last album came out in like 2016, but I've got the song printed out the lyrics to the song "The Born Supremacy" on here. If you want to listen to some cool music that's like it's like baroque pop, 60s esque mixed with a 90s flair, chamber music, Brit pop. Listen to the Last Shadow Puppets, Miles Kane and Alex Turner. Especially the songs Dracula Teeth, Aviation, and Born Identity. Great songs, dude. Such great songwriting. What's their album? The Arctic Monkeys album Moonbase is pretty good. So I dig that. That's pretty cool. Also, obviously Oasis. You know I love Oasis. So if you want to see me do anything, please leave a comment afterwards. You can always help me out by just leaving comment after the stream is over. Yes, I like the first Fleet Foxes album. In fact, um, White Winter Hymnal is a good song. I like that first album on Sub Pop is like sublime. That's a great album. Fleet Foxes album from um what was that? Late 2000s? The Arctic Monkeys album Humbug is amazing. Sub Pop label used to be so good back in the day. That and Kill Rock Stars were so good. The best record labels were my favorite ones are modular recordings in Australia with like the presets and Bag Raiders and Lady Hawk, and then Astroworks is a great because Astroworks also put out did they put out Late of the Pier? I like the fantasy label Phantasy by Errol Alkin. He puts out amazing music. ATB for the Love of a Princess, 90s trance. Metronomy is great. I love the Metronomy remix with Fred Falk. You know Fred Falk and Alan Brax, but the Fred Falk album with 808 at the Beach is great. 808s and Heartbreaks by Kanye is one of my favorite albums. Do I prefer Alice in Chains or Soundgarden? Definitely Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains, Dirt is a perfect album, especially the song Down in a Hole is so good. I love Alice in Chains. Um, when when I went to when I went to lacrosse camp at Washington and Lee in 6th grade summer after 6th grade, I think, with my best friend, he brought a boombox and he played Dirt and Soul Asylum's, and the Soul Asylum album, like, over so many times that the coach finally busted into our room and was like, "You guys gotta turn this shit down. You can't keep playing this." And we played it nonstop on full blast. Um, I like Soundgarden too, though. I like Super Unknown and, first Soundgarden album. I like Soundgarden, but I like, Temple of the Dog. Temple of the Dog is, you know, like, "Say hello to heaven" is one of my favorite. I like that song because, it's the song "All Night Thing" and "Say Hello to Heaven" were the songs I was listening to at the time when I was in 7th grade, and I fell in love for the first time, and, uh, so every time I think of those, um, shouts out to Gail in France, uh, I just can't help but think of those, um, yeah, I like Ryan Adams, but I also like, I like Bryan Adams. I mean, look, the Bryan Adams song from Robin Hood that's like, if you were alive at the time, then that's a great song for you, like, because it was on all the time, and it's like, it's a beautiful song. It just is. It just is. Doesn't mean it's just cool. So, I don't know, I guess I have an eclectic taste in music, and I like weird stuff. So, but whatever, that's music. I've been to a million concerts. I was in a band. I was in 3 bands. Um, and that's one thing I appreciate about songwriters. We for with my punk band in 9th grade, like we wrote all our, and so I wrote the lyrics to all the songs, and we would play those. But I never really was confident I mean, I was in 9th grade, but I was never confident as a songwriter because I just can't. I think that's a thing that I can't get a handle on. So that's tough. But anyway, so I guess that's about it. Shouts out to everybody out there. Thank you for being here. I know I've ended like 3 times now, but, I played guitar and sang. So, yeah, Prince of Thieves, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Morgan Freeman. All right, so we better end it. So thanks, everybody. Please leave a comment after you're done. Please like and share the stream. Share it on your platforms. Come back and see us. Um, please, subscribe to the channel. You can support me at any time on any of the, uh, platforms in the channel description or the video description, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. It's almost summertime, and, it's getting warm. I hope everybody has a good, Memorial Day, sponsored by Raytheon out there, and, maybe watch some. Well, I've been hoping they would put, like, Dirty Dozen or something on TV. They used to do that in the old days, and I can do that, but, whatever. We got a bunch of movie analyses and film analysis coming up. So, in the meantime, that's about it, and, here's, Rooks G and, cut off his new album, Take It Away. This is our homeboy Rooks G. You can see his, link in the description. Please go to his channel and subscribe. He's our homeboy, and, he makes great jungle drum and bass. So thank you to Rooks G. We love you. We appreciate you, and, here's Rooks G and, cut off his new album, Take It Away.